So a very warm welcome from me on behalf of the CCWW, the Center for the Study of Contemporary Women's Writing. And I just want, the first thing that I want to say is a big thank you to Maria and Oliver for organizing this conference. I think the whole concept of having the comparative element in there is brilliant. And I also want to say thank you to Jenny Stubbs, who's making it all possible behind the scenes here. So at the CCWW, we very clearly, obviously, are concerned with contemporary women's writing. But we particularly interested in seeing how women's texts correspond to, speak to each other across borders, so across languages and across cultures. And so this conference for us fits perfectly with our aims, and I think it's going to be a very exciting and illuminating enterprise. I also wanted to say that quite often we try to give a platform to writers and to texts that maybe haven't had the exposure that they deserve. And so again, this conference is really important for us because we will be able to concentrate on texts and autobiographical texts by Muslim women, which is sometimes a little neglected as a topic, I think. Anyway, many thanks again, and special welcome also to Shirin. It's brilliant that you can make it and you can be here, and I look forward to the afternoon. Maria, over to you.
Thank you, Godela, and a big thank you to the Center for the Study of Contemporary Women's Writing for making this event possible. I would just like to say a few words before we start the conference on the conference itself and a few housekeeping notes before we get started. So the imperative behind this conference is to examine some of the many ways in which, through their life narratives, Muslim authors, they are able to counter the way in which Islam and the Islamic world have been represented, especially following the 9/11 events and the upsurge of Islamophobia that followed. Islamophobia did not originate with the 9/11 events, but certainly it intensified in their wake. And the focus of this conference is on the female speaking subject, discriminated against because of their gender and because of their religion. So through their voices, these female Muslim authors, they contribute to the debate on Muslim women's identity and agency in contemporary Europe, and invite us to rethink traditional analysis that sets the non-Western as backwards. The conference is ultimately an invitation to think beyond the nation state, to think less about borders and more about what Professor Charles Burdett has called the web of interconnectivities that bind different parts of the world together. I would also like to add that Muslim women writers here is not used as an all-encompassing label to flatten the specificity of women's individuality, but it is meant to designate writers with different backgrounds and different private personal stories. And we've gathered them together for the purpose of this conference because they share the same religious views and the same literary activism. And we do hope that through the papers that will be presented today, we will be able to show the differences, these women's constitutive differences. We are delighted to have Shirin Ramzanali Fazel with us and Simone Brioni as guest speakers. And I will introduce them and their collaborative text later on. I think they're both online, both of them. Yeah. Okay, just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. We ask our speakers to please keep their papers within 20 minutes, and we will have a Q&A session at the end of each paper. A 10-minute Q&A session, so we will keep it to 10 minutes. You can raise your hand or you can put a question in the chat. We will be monitoring the chat. The event is divided into 2 panels and we will have an half an hour break in between. I think that Oliver might want to add a few words.
Yes, so just to say hi, my name is Oliver Brett. Really pleased to be collaborating with Maria on this project. And I think hopefully it'll be a fruitful afternoon and that lots of really good ideas will come out of it. And obviously in the process of, so in terms of my own interests, the comparative element is something that is really important. But in that and in the discussions that come out this afternoon, obviously we want it to feel like it's a space in which people can discuss and openly share their ideas and give feedback perhaps to the presenters on their work. So essentially what I'm getting at is that we want it to be sort of a safe space in which people can discuss things openly. But yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, right. Delighted to welcome the first speaker today, Francesca Calamita. Hi, Francesca.
Hi, Maria. Good morning or good afternoon.
Hello. Thank you for being with us today, despite the super early start. You literally rose before the sun today. So Francesca is Associate Professor at the University of Virginia and also member of the steering committee at the Center for the Study of Contemporary Women's Writing. And her paper today will sort of set the frame for the conference. So Francesca, if you could just say a few words about yourself, and we're looking forward to your paper.
Thank you, Maria. Yes, as you said, I am an associate professor at the University of Virginia. I work in Italian women's writing in particular, and I'm also affiliated to the Department of Women, Gender and Sexuality. Over the last 15 years, I work mostly on gender issue in the European and Italian context, but I developed a strong interest into women's rights over the last few years from a global perspective. So today I would like to talk about the unveiling controversy in 2023, and I hope it will be helpful as a first introduction talk for the conference today.
Thank you.
So I would like to start my talk with a question for all of you. Why is a woman's choice about her body often disregarded in both Western and non-Western countries? In June 2022, Roe versus Wade, the landmark 1973 U.S. Supreme Court case that gave American women the right to access safe abortion, was overturned. In September 2022, Mahsa Amini died after being arrested by the Iranian police for not wearing the hijab correctly. Recently, the number of healthcare practitioners, what we call in Italian obiettori di coscienza, who refuse to perform abortion on moral grounds, reached its highest peak in Italy, thus depriving many women of their rights to terminate unwanted pregnancies. Policing women's body in both Western and non-Western contexts is influenced by social norm and tradition, including religious orientation, and also by culturally accepted misogynistic practices to control part of the population. As Cynthia and Loy remind us, the personal is international. thus suggesting that women's decisions about their bodies, such as wearing the headscarf or getting an abortion, are central to international politics and global affairs. The way women act in these terrains can influence an international community. Furthermore, the personal is also political, as a well-known slogan of the second wave feminism reminds us. This slogan suggests that women's issues in their private sphere are political issues, which in turn require feminist political intervention to change the status quo. Many personal experiences can be linked and framed within a system of power relationship. And I would like to reflect, to think about this point today in particular. How does the personal become political and international in the context of the headscarf issue in 2023? Some of you, or maybe all of you, may be familiar with Nafisi, Azar Nafisi, a very well-known Iranian woman writer. In her memoir, she said, I said that my integrity as a teacher and as a woman was compromised by the blackmailed imposition of the veil. It was not the veil as such that was the issue, but the freedom to choose. When the veil was imposed on Iranian women in workplaces shortly after the Islamic Revolution of 1979, Azar Nafisi attempted to express her concern about the right to make choices about their body. Along with two other female colleagues who did not want to wear it while teaching at the university, she attended a meeting where professors had the opportunity to ask questions to government leaders on the future of education in the country. Not long after the event, as the writer tells us in her memoir, one of her colleagues was fired, another one resigned. The three women are not only aware about the imposition on their bodies, but they also use it to communicate their distress in public space. My colleague at the University of Virginia, Professor Farzaneh Milani, suggests in her book on the emerging voice of Iranian women's writing that the details of veiling may be a point of contention among theologians of different sects, but the function of the veil is beyond any dispute. It is to hide the women from the view of forbidden men. It is a deliberate, obsessive attempt to keep that symbolize the private real, that is, women and anything associated with her, hidden. In fact, the veil can readily be compared to a portable wall, a strategic mobile segregation. As the Iranian-American scholar remarks, the Quran does not suggest any penalty for women who unveil. Yet, in Islamic tradition, clothing is a means to reduce sexual enticement. The history of veiling in Iran dates back to the early 20th century, when the country was ruled by the Pahlavi dynasty and it was called the Imperial State of Persia. At that time, women and men were actually encouraged to adopt Western lifestyle and clothing, while compulsory veiling became a reality in 1979, and it was a progressive reality, gradual reality. Firstly, it was proclaimed that the working women should wear the Islamic form of modest dress. Then, after mass demonstration and a lot of contestation, as also Nafisi reminds us in her memoir, in 1980s the veil was made mandatory in all government and public offices, and finally in 1983 it was made compulsory for all women, including foreigners, non-Muslim and tourists. So the veil controversy in Iran became a symbol of the broader struggle for democracy and human rights. And while some women in Iran embrace veiling as a symbol of their faith and identity, many feel that is an oppressive requirement that limits their personal freedom. So as I was saying, the protests started well before the tragic death of Mahsa Amini. Already, for example, in 2017 and 2018, there were episodes of Iranian women removing the headscarf and waving also as a symbol of protest. Think about, for example, the movement of the Girls of Revolution Street or the White Wednesday campaign. And I'll tell you more about this a little bit later. Italian journalist Oriana Fallaci already in the 1960s talk about several forms of veiling. Of course, Oriana Fallaci did not benefit about all the theories and studies we do have today about veiling and unveiling. However, at that time, more from a global point of view, without focusing on a specific country, as I'm attempting to do today, she said, and I read this in Italian, you have the translation in English on my PowerPoint. Vi sono donne al mondo che ancora oggi vivono dietro la fitta nebbia di un velo, e più che un velo è un lenzuolo, per nascondere dalla vista di chiunque non sia il marito, un bimbo. Questo lenzuolo, che lo si chiami purda o burka o bushi o culle o gelaba, ha due buchi all'altezza degli occhi e attraverso quei buchi o quel graticcio esse guardano il cielo e la gente, come attraverso le sbarre di una prigione. It's important to remark in this context that there are a variety of headscarf that some Muslim women use. The hijab is one of the less constrictive and the most popular worn in the West by migrant and second generation. The niqab covered the entire body, head and face, with an opening left for the eyes, while the burqa covered the entire face and a mesh screen covered the eyes. Chandra Mohanty, in Feminism Without Borders, Decolonizing Theory, Practice, Solidarity, criticized Western feminism for its tendency to describe non-Western women as an entire group, as a monolith, rather than in their uniqueness. Furthermore, she's critical of US and Eurocentric privileged feminism, which are perceived as being part of capitalism. Today, with this talk, I would like to avoid generalizing about all Muslim women or all Christian women, and instead select a particular sociocultural context in both Western and non-Western countries. Iranian women's protest went global thanks to the media in recent years, particularly social media. Similar to the Me Too movement in the Western context, the story of Mahsa Amini reached every corner of the world in a few days and made people aware of the repression happening in Iran. International support of activists and human rights grew, and engaged citizens from many countries immediately followed the hashtag, which is still in place. For example, at the 2023 Venice Film Festival in early September, a flash mob took place in solidarity with women of Iran fighting for their freedom. As well as filmmakers and artists who had been imprisoned for the cause. The flash mob was held on the day of Tatami, a film by an Israeli director and an Iranian actress. It tells the story of a young female judoka at the World Championship recalled home by Iranian authorities during the competition. As Mehdi Semati suggests, in media, culture, and society in Iran, living with globalization and the Islamic State, social media plays a role in the present-day Iranian protest. Yet it's a complex one. On the one hand, social media helps to spread ideas among Iranians. On the other hand, such posts are very often retold on Western media, and often reinforcing femo-nationalist narratives. John Wallace Scott reminds us that the headscarf controversy raged in France in the early 2000s. And many people at that time asked themselves, why did girls wear veils? Were they freely chosen or forced upon them? Could the headscarf be considered a legitimate expression of individual conscience and therefore warrant protection under liberal secular law? In 2004, the French government instituted a ban about all conspicuous signs of religion affiliation in school, including the headscarf. At that time, the ban was highly criticized and intended to target Muslim girls, yet the law, including all religious signs to prevent France's secularism. The context analyzed by Scott is different from Iran. It's a controversy that happened in a secular European state, France, and intersect with discourses on post-colonialism, migration, and identity. However, the question raised about constraints on women's choices also apply to the Iranian context. With the Islamic Revolution in 1979, women in Iran have been stripped of their right to choose, exactly as American women after the overturn of Roe versus Wade in June 2022, or Italian women when they deal with conscientious objector in hospital. Many Iranian women and girls have not accepted the rules over the years and have pushed the boundary for a new interpretation of femininity that calls into question the notion of modesty as perceived by the states. Similar to Western women's rallies about abortion rights, with many Western women dressed as handmaids from The Handmaid's Tale of Margaret Atwood, Iranian women remove their veil to protest against constraints upon their bodily autonomy. And also Nafisi find a way to protest about this. For example, in her memoir, she said that she pretended to disappear. And in this way, pretending to disappear, her mind could adventure to somewhere where she's free to make choices. Shaban reminds us that in the past, Western feminists saw Iranian women's resistance to the veil as an opportunity to pursue an international feminist movement. Yet, after the expulsion of Kate Millett from Iran, there was also much awareness that women in the West had and still have privilege while protesting against their government. If women protesting in London, New York, Rome, and Paris have very low risk of being imprisoned, Iranian women risked and still risk their lives. In solidarity with Iranian women, several other activists and everyday women participated recently in the White West Day campaign. For example, women from Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, and others post photos and videos of themselves wearing a white scarf or nothing on their heads at all to show solidarity with other women protesting about compulsory hijab. In her biography, Aline Jad referred to this campaign as a new success for her quest. As Shaban noted on this occasion, however, there was a questionable silence from Western feminists on White Wednesday, most notably from Linda Sarsour, one of the organizers of the Women's March, as well as other left-oriented politicians. According to Shaban, some journalists suggest that Western feminists like Sarsour did not want to appear Islamophobic while working to normalize hijab in their own countries. I want to say that today with this talk, I am walking on a minefield. as Mona Elthaway already suggests working on her monograph. On the one hand, the racist right wing would like to hear critique of the headscarf, to justify their racism. But on the other hand, a weak left wing is scared to criticize it, to appear inclusive and to accept diversity. It's for this particular articulated scenario that debating on the headscarf has become a highly politicized topic. However, Muslim women in Middle East and Northern Africa not always have a choice, as Healthaway's recent monograph suggests, and as in the example of Iran. Yet Muslim women may lack choices about attire in secular Europe as well, as in the example of the 24 ban in France. I also would like to say that in September 2023, the Ministry of Education in France announced that the abaya, a robe-like dress, usually black, which covered the entire body except the head, used by some Muslim women, will be forbidden in school in France. The ban, in line with the French law on secularism, that prohibits the wearing by pupils of sign of clothing ostensibly expressing religious affiliation, either in of themselves or because of the pupil behaviors. Yet someone else is deciding on what women should or should not wear once again. The Western context of France is very different and roots in post-colonial discourse from that of Iran. However, with this law, the French government is regulating women's body exactly as the Islamic Republic of Iran or the United States, as well as Italy, in terms of accessibility to safe abortion. And let me conclude by saying that if the act of veiling has a liberating potential, so does the act of veiling. It all depends on the context in which such act is carried out, or more precisely, on how and where women see dominance. Difference should neither be defined by the dominant sex nor by the dominant culture. And this is exactly the message I would like to pass today. It's ultimately a woman's choice to decide on her body, in the headscarf controversy as in the abortion debate. The recent hijab controversy in France and the unveiling laws over the course of the 20th century in Iran happen in different cultural and religious contexts. Similar to the overturn of Roe versus Wade and the growing number of obiettori di coscienza, these things also rely on the peculiarities of American and Italian society, respectively. In all the examples, however, the patriarchy attempts to control women's body, to regulate them, to segregate them, and in turn to subjugate them. And let me finish by saying that in the Gender Gap Global Index in 2023, the United States are at the 43rd place, Italy at the 79th place, and Iran at the 143rd place. The political empowerment sub-index show even a larger gender gap. Only 10 countries out of 146 scored above 50% parity score. These are New Zealand, Finland, Germany, Nicaragua, Bangladesh, Mozambique, Rwanda, Costa Rica, Sweden, and Chile. The US, Italy, and Iran do not make the threshold. In 67 other countries out of 146, women have never served as head of state in the past 50 years. This is the case of the US, Italy, and Iran. Italy has currently a female, far-oriented prime minister, Giorgia Meloni. How can we stop governments regulating our bodies if we do not reach a position of power where such decisions are taken? And if we reach them, as in the case of Meloni, may not be an advancement in terms of women's rights, given her very conservative position on abortion and immigration, as I debated widely in my latest monograph. In her memoir, Nafisi tells us that she left Tehran in 1997 and moved to the US, where she's free to teach the English literature that she has been studying for her entire life without a feeling of retaliation. Yet, is her body really free to choose in this more liberal country? While she's free to express opinions, she cannot still have full bodily autonomy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francesca, for a most inspiring paper that, as I said before, set the frame for today's conference. And I'm sure there will be plenty of questions from the audience. We might have 10 minutes to start for the Q&A. So let me just check the chat. We have any questions? I might have a question then till we wait for everybody to sort of process what you said and come up with questions, and I'm sure they will do. Thinking of social media and the pervasive presence and role that they have in everyday society, what do you think is the role of social media in spreading the wrong information about feminist issues such as abortion or the veiling issues?
Maria, thanks for this question. It's a difficult one to reply to, since it's also a very controversial point. On the one hand, social media give to feminist collectives and activists a lot of visibility. But on the other hand, also they spread misinformation. On social media, we may find the genuine page of a feminist collective attempting to fight for certain rights. In our conference, let's talk about women's rights. But on the other hand, there are also a lot of news that are fake, that people read and that people share, and that do not help at all with this cause. However, I think that in the case of certain feminist issues, such as abortion rights or the issue of veiling and unveiling, it makes people aware of this issue, and also users of social media have the opportunity to engage and confront with each other. Now, if it wasn't for social media, I probably wouldn't have started this new research on the issue of veiling or unveiling in Iran. And it's also true that much of the protest also happen on social media. There's an issue with it. The fact that the news coming from Iran, for example, are retold by Western media, and then retold in a way we want to hear those news. And so they may arrive in a very different way, they may be politicized, but I think it's also important to listen to the voices of women, not only activists, not only politicians, but everyday women who want democracy, who want to be able to do with their body what they want to do with their body. And so on this regard, the page, for example, My Sturdy Freedom, has been criticized, but also very important because has given the opportunity to the everyday Iranian woman to express their ideas and to make others aware. So it's a difficult question, Maria, but I hope I was able to tell you a little bit more.
You were, thank you. Thank you so much, Francesca. Have we got any other question from the audience? I'm just checking with Oliver if we have any questions, or we might want to save them for later. So to keep within time, what do you think? Yeah, okay, we have one more question. Yeah, okay. Okay, so Oliver will ask you one question. I will mute myself.
Hi, Francesca.
Hi, Oliver.
Thank you for a really interesting paper. I'm just wondering whether you could just say a little bit more about misinformation, and because misinformation is not necessarily kind of completely wrong. So in terms of like the use of facts and that sort of blending of what's real and what's not real, and how do we manage that information? I'm just intrigued as to whether you could say a little bit more about that, please.
Oliver, thanks for this question. This is a point that often come up also with my students in class, and that sometimes they ask me, so what we can do? And what we can do is always reading. If I only relied on what I see on social media in order to learn about the Iran situation, of course, I wouldn't be able to have an opinion on what was happening. I wouldn't be able to address it academically. So I think that sometimes it's a good way for students in particular to look what is happening online. And see how feminist collectives, how activists, but also as everyday people, as academics, talk about certain issues. But then it's also important, in my opinion, to read what academics have written on that point, to listen to what experts in that area say. We cannot only rely on social media or on social platform in order to make political analysis. But on the other hand, they are important. They are important to spread the word. They are important to make people aware of what is happening. I'm also thinking about the Me Too movement. It wasn't for social media. It wouldn't have spread across the world. And the same with the protest of Iranian women. Would have been the same without social media? No, I don't think so, because we wouldn't have the opportunity to learn what was happening in a few days. So what I say to my students is that when they do see a news, they need to check where the news come from. They need to double check the academic sources. They need to study what news said. They need to address the source. In other words, if it's academic, it's a popular culture source. But on the other hand, they can still rely on what the internet offers us as a base to develop further knowledge. So this is normally the suggestion, usually the suggestion I give to them when we debate this topic together in class.
Thank you, Francesca. So we have a question, a couple of questions. Who was first? Is it, excuse me if I've not pronounced, is it Eklas? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Good day, everyone. Yeah, can you hear me well?
Yes, can you?
Yes, it's Eklas, yes.
Thank you.
Dr. Eklas Al-Shamari from University of Kufa, Iraq. Coming from a Middle Eastern country, a neighbor to Iran, and knowing most of the traditions, culture about this country, which are somehow similar to the ones that we have in Iraq. These are two critical issues with regard to women's rights, if I may say so. It's the veiling and unveiling, abortion, and some other things related to women's body. First of all, and this is a recurring question that I have been receiving from some of my students, American students. Why aren't you free to get abortion? Well, actually, we have to look at the different backgrounds, culturally, traditionally, religiously. Most important, religiously, there are religious restrictions on abortion and the hijab, if we may call it, because veil is the cover on the face mostly. The hijab is the cover on the head and the body. So we shouldn't. This is what I told them. And yes, thank you, Francesca, for the presentation. I should have said that at the beginning. Thank you, and thank you for being interested in such a topic. Shouldn't we consider these regulations, not restrictions, if I may say so, because religion, tradition, culture, they make difference. Let's say if I want to say between, let aside Iran, if I want to compare Iraq and the United States, it's impossible consideration. All these backgrounds and the ordains of the holy books, for instance, as far as Islam is concerned, if a woman is pregnant and this pregnancy is going to affect her life, she can get rid of it, but there is a limited number of weeks when she can before. Otherwise, it will be biologically not possible, because this baby is going to get spiritually, we say, the spirit in it. So we need to consider these things. So don't you think that we should, if we want to compare two different cultures, we have to put these things into consideration? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eklas, for this. I agree with you 100%. It's very difficult to talk about abortion rights or the veiling unveiling issue from a global perspective without taking into consideration each different culture and each different scenario. So this is exactly what I want, the message I wanted to pass today, that it's possible to explore the possibility of doing feminist work across cultural divides without ignoring difference or falling into cultural relativism. But on the other hand, it is also important to compare, to see the differences in the way we approach the issue around the world. So I appreciate your comment and your points that are also in line with what I think.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. I think, Giorgio, did you have your hand up? But that's gone down now. So I'll pass back to Maria.
Okay, thank you. I think there was another question. Adalgisa, did you have your hand raised before? Hi,
yes, I did. Yes, I did, but partly the question has been answered. But I will, if we have time, I will say what I wanted to ask Francesca. And I know that she's done quite a bit of work on or at least she's been very interested in intersectional feminism. And I was just wondering whether in different countries, at least the ones that are more relevant to you, perhaps, and you study best or better Italy and, for example, the US, how their positions, where they place themselves on the debate and the dilemmas that you have highlighted on the issue of what position one should take in the end, and the traps and all the problematics that you have highlighted.
Adalgisa, thanks for this question. Yes, in the US, debating about the veil in the US is different from debating about the veil in Iran or debating about the veil in France, because they are, or in France or in Italy, because they are a very different reality. And there was a point in my paper where I said that, for example, Iranian feminist activists and Iranian women expected more support from left-wing oriented politicians and activists in the US. And in fact, for example, the Women's March, the organization of the Women's March wasn't at the beginning of the protest in 2022 after the death of Masha Amini wasn't so vocal as they have been in other issues. For example, they've been very vocal after the overturn of Roe versus Wade, but they haven't been as supportive as I would expect, for example, in this issue. And I was saying in the paper that these has something to do with the fact that, of course, left-wing politicians and feminist activists in the US are also working on normalizing day job in the American society. And so there was the idea that they didn't get engaged not to appear Islamophobic. But then once again, this was an issue because we were talking about the veiling or unveiling issue in Iran, not in the US, and the approach was supposed and is actually different. Once again, it depends on the culture and the country. The way it was approached in Italy is different from France. For example, we never had a ban like the one that came in 2004 in France. But on the other hand, a lot of negative opinions have been expressed from far-right politicians on veiling. You may all remember some episode happening in the last few years. I'm thinking about when Silvia Romano was liberated, for example. But particularly the Lega Nord and the right-wing parties, they all played a lot with the rhetoric of veiling and unveiling. So once again, it's depend on the culture and the context when you address it. I hope it makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'd like to suggest a change in the program because the conversation with the author was due to start in 10 minutes, and I'm a bit concerned about Simone because I know he's supposed to present at another conference today, so we might be running out of time a bit. So I'd like, if you all agree with me, I'd like to do the conversation, the dialogue between Simone and Shirin now, and then I will present my paper on Shirin's text, which I think makes also kind of sense. And if you have some questions then about my interpretation of the text or about the text itself, you can ask me and Shirin as well, since we're lucky enough to have the author with us today. Simone, Shirin, do you agree with me? Sorry, this is a bit of makeshift decision. Are you okay starting now?
Yeah, because Simone has to travel. I'm
exactly.
sure that he needs time.
Exactly. That I was thinking, yeah. Okay. We all good, we all agree. Brilliant. I'm really delighted to welcome Shirin and Simone today. Thank you for being here. And can I just say that I really enjoyed the dialogue with them before the conference. So there was a bit of a back and forth with them. We created a WhatsApp chat where we discussed the themes of the conference and we selected together a few topics that we wanted to bring up today. So in a way, we can say that this interview is a sort of a collaborative interview. I'd like to introduce them quickly. Shirin Ramzanali Fazel is an Italian writer of Somali and Pakistani origins. She grew up in Mogadishu during the 60s, so during Somalia's Italian trusteeship. As a child, she attended the Italian schools in the Somali capital city. In the 1970s, she moved to Italy in Novara first, and then Vicenza. A true global citizen, she also resided in Zambia, Saudi Arabia, and in the United States, among other places. She's currently living in Birmingham. Shirin's first novel, Lontano da Mogadiscio, firstly published in 1994, is a landmark text in Italian post-colonial and migration literature. It describes the author's experience of migration to Italy, which is interspersed with memories of her hometown before the destruction brought about by the Civil War. And Simone Brioni is Associate Professor in the Department of English at Stony Brook University in New York, and an affiliated faculty member in the Departments of Africana Studies and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies. He specializes in the literary and cinematographic representation and self-representation of migrants and post-colonial literatures. On these topics, he co-authored 3 documentaries, Aulò and La Quarta Via in 2012, and Maca in 2022, with and about Geneviève macaquing. Publications in this area include The Somali Within, 2015, Scrivere di Islam, co-authored with Shirin 2020, which is the text we will be presenting today and discussing today, and L'Italia l'altrove 2022. So Islam and Me is the English version of Scrivere di Islam, and it has been self-translated by Shirin, and the translation has been edited by Simone. It is a personal exploration of the need to rethink national and cultural identity, and a meditation on the multi-religious, multicultural, and multilingual reality we live in, focusing on the discrimination of Muslim women in Italy and in the United Kingdom. Shirin analyzes the way these women are represented, especially in the media, and so how knowledge and meaning are created. The text ends with a reflection, or I should say a meta-reflection, on the collaborative practice between an Italian, Somali, Pakistani female writer, Shirin herself, and a white male scholar, Simone, which is presented as a way to counter the colonial model of knowledge production. Okay, Shirin, as a sort of an icebreaker question, I would just like to ask you, why did you decide to write Islam and Me?
First of all, I would like to thank all the organizers, and thank you very much for inviting me, and good afternoon to everybody who's joined us in this conversation, in this conference. Why did I write Islam and Me? I did not sit down and say I want to write it now, but it is pieces, is made of some passages that every now and then I was writing during time. Because after 9/11, a lot has changed toward Muslims and Islam as a religion. Suddenly, an act committed by a bunch of criminals became a collective punishment toward Muslims and communities so diverse among them living around the world. Media and politicians portrayed Islam as a religion of hate, fanatics, barbarian, and violent. In Italy, talk shows had become means of disinformation. And this is not the religion I grew up with, the religion I'm practicing every day, which is empathy, respect toward every human being. So for me, it was terrible. There was no chance to make my voice heard. As an Italian citizen, I felt second class, discriminated against for my religion. So for me, writing was the only mean, the only way I could express my frustration, my pain, and many times my anger. The attack was not only multimedia, but it came tangible. From suspicious looks, ugly jokes, racial profiling, the invasive checks at the Fiumicino airport, which consisted in taking me in a room by a woman police officer and asking me to remove my veil, my hijab, as if I could, hide something, God knows what, under this veil. It was really, now I'm just laughing because it was a bit, 2, 3, 4 years ago. But it's not nice, it leaves you the impression that somebody is violating you. And this is something that I felt on my body. many times we forget that terrorism kills more Muslims in the world than, and this double standard of not recognizing the suffering of innocent victims and that are living in non-Western countries make me sad. So with my little voice, with my tiny voice, I wanted to share my personal story as an Italian citizen in order to make known my feelings, my fears, and those of other people who are living, on the other side of the. So I'm also, this is how it started. This book, let us say, it's made of different things that I want to discuss. Sometimes it's the veil, sometimes it's the looks, sometimes it's the body search, sometimes it's the media, sometimes it's even school books, how they are, portraying Islam to kids. I hope I gave I explained.
You did. You certainly did. Thank you. Yes, Islam and me is a very much personal narrative. I'd like if both of you could share with us how this collaborative project started and how your respective career as a writer and as a scholar have benefited from this intercultural exchange, which is an intercultural encounter and a professional exchange at the same time. So this is for both of you.
Where is Simone?
Well, our dialogue started really right. When I started doing my research on Somali writers, on writers of Somali origins for my PhD, as a young researcher, I had to write about the work of women mostly who wrote about a country I've never been to, I couldn't go to because of the civil war, and I had the means of the tools. I knew the tools of literary analysis, etc. But also I felt the need to go beyond the somehow the model in which you have the white Western scholar analyzing, taking as an object the work by women writers, and also by women writers coming, especially from former Italian colonies, like Somali writers. And so I felt the need to create a dialogue to write not only about but also with Somali writers. I've collaborated with Kaha Mollazadeh, who was definitely an inspiration, who kind of who saw her oral tale La Quarta Via as a story that needed to be retold. And with Shirin, we also had a similar, kind of encounter, but, to edit to actually republish Lontano da Mogadiscio in English, and that was our first collaboration. I think our collaboration came out of also the urgency of make this Shirin's work known, but also out of some constrictions, out of some obstacles. I mean, we are used to think at our world as a world where we can communicate, we can write on Facebook what we think, we can self-publish on Amazon. It is relatively easy to to publish our work, and to circulate it. But then, how much is it possible to actually access a cultural, let's say, circuit? How is it possible to actually circulate? Shirin wrote this text, Far from Mogadiscio, which is like a landmark text in Italian contemporary literature. It is the first text where, written by a migrant woman in Italian, where she actually talks about the legacy of colonialism, and she is also a very strange experimental text, a modernist text, where she has, she puts together like a autobiography with more general consideration about how it feels to be a racialized woman in Italy. So it's a very interesting text, and yet we couldn't find a book publisher in in the UK, in the US. We also received some strange questions from publisher. No, is she, is the text written well in Italian? No, somehow, without acknowledging the experimental nature of this text. And so we decided to write a text together to talk about precisely this difficulty. And that was the beginning of Islam and Me, that text reflecting about our collaboration, the choices that were made by editing and republishing Lontano da Mogadiscio. And it is actually quite interesting that the text was published as a co-authored book in Italian and as a text by Shirin, edited by me in English. And one of the reasons why we publish it in this way is because definitely we had to create this dialogue, but of course my position as a person working in the academia gave me the opportunity to access funds that could allow this publication as well. And so there are still it is possible to communicate whatever we want in the age of the internet, but but Spivak's question of so the subaltern can speak, but I'm not sure if you are still if you are yet able to listen to these narrations, if you are actually if there is still enough attention to minor narrations. And indeed, a couple of days ago, Shirin and I were still talking about where to publish her book, because even if she has published with Rutgers University Press, she has a new book, an important book, but we still don't know exactly where to publish it. And Shirin has experienced different types of publication, from academic publishing to self-publishing, etc. We are still trying to find the best way to somehow make her work available.
Can I add something, Simone? That that I'm a bit allergic to some publishers. So for me, I like my freedom. I like to express really what I have to say. And sometimes I don't mean about the university press that took me to a really good level with your help, make my voice hear. But small publishers at the end, they don't give you they don't publicize your work, and many times they want to change what you say. So for me, it's really important to have that freedom. In fact, working with you, collaborating with you, what I really liked is that my thoughts, I could freely express my thoughts with that mutual respect that we have, and that equality. It was not a professor, an academic, with a subaltern, a writer. So this is what I always try to defend, because I like to say what I think. I don't want other people to change my ideas or camouflage what I have to say. So in a way, working with you, collaborating with you all these years, because we know each other since 2010, a long way since we both came to the UK. And in a way, I when I have a project, I approach Simone, because he is a volcano of ideas and he is so, collaborative. So I think working with Simone was really very positive. I grew up as a writer. I learned a lot of things, and it is a positive, as a human being also, not only for the career or knowing something. So it was beneficial to both of us, I think.
Thank you, and good luck finding a suitable venue for publication. The question.
I think I already found it, so it's going soon it's going to come out, and
great.
That's my freedom, of expressing myself. Yeah.
Well, that's great news. I'm glad. The question, is the text well written, made me smile, and it is beautifully written. It's really poetic text. And we might want to discuss the stigma attached to migrant literature a bit more later on, maybe. And Simone has covered it already a bit. We might want to add some to it later on if we got some time. Since we started off today's conference discussing the controversy surrounding the use of the veil on the part of Muslim women, as Francesca has discussed at length, I'd like to pick it up from there and link it to what Shirin says in Islam and Me, when she links it she links the need to liberate, quote unquote, Muslim women from the veil. She links it to the colonial domination and the need to teach the submissive how to behave in a civilized manner. So what is predicated upon as a liberation becomes an imposition of a way of life, a mentality the Muslim women might not necessarily share. Sorry, this is not a question, it's more of a prompt. So this is for both of you. What would you like to add to it?
Can I start? Yes. Okay. So I think with the excuse of liberating Muslim women, this small piece of cloth has become extremely a big issue, really, in creating this stigma and stereotype, labeling women who wear it as backwards, ignorant, as women under the thumb of a tyrant father or husband. So the Western model is always the yardstick. This imposition includes these women from, it excludes them from fully participating to the, to the society, because sometimes you hear women cannot go to work with the hijab. So they will stay at home. They cannot go to certain universities. So at the end, you are excluding them from the society instead of including them. And I think inclusion and diversity is the way to bring communities to live in harmony together. Also because the hijab is not only a religious symbol, at least I think, because many times women wear it for so many different decide to wear it. Some girls, they decide to wear it because they want to rebel. Others because it's imposed on the families. Others because it's fashionable. Others is for ideological or political. Others is for traditional. So a woman has to have that choice of wearing the hijab. And I'm also contrary on the countries, the so-called Muslim countries, who want to impose the hijab on women, because the Quran doesn't impose on women. It's your own choice, it's your own spiritual journey, if you want. So when these countries impose women to wear the hijab, it's completely wrong. It's not Islamic, at least for me. So a woman at the end has to have the choice to wear it or not wear it. And the governments or the media, or they don't have to be stigmatized, or they don't have to be told what to wear and what not to wear. This is the only thing I want to add to this discussion of the hijab.
Perhaps I just wanted to make perhaps a comment also on that. I think the two images that were chosen for Far From Mogadishu in the front cover, in the back cover, show the spiritual journey of Shirin, and she selected these two images. We see her very young without a hijab, and actually in the back cover we see her with the hijab. And actually in the second edition, I think the religious element is actually more prominent, and also in Islam and Me, this aspect, how it feels to be a Muslim woman in Italy, in the UK, etc., is actually very problematized. And at the same time, what I really like, and I speak here not as a collaborator, but as a literary scholar about Shirin's work, what I really admire about her work is that she has traveled a lot. She knows many different Islams, and she can acknowledge of the fact that Islam in different parts of the world means also different things. And she can show actually the complexity also of the so-called what is often called in newspapers, in the media, like the Muslim world. So she can show this complexity. Also, what I really like about Shirin, which is part of her, of her style, of the theme of her work, is that we often see somehow revolution or impegno in like presenting spectacularized or very extremes of the Islam or of migration, etc. Instead, she talks about the ordinarity of her experience, like the day-to-day life for her and for the people she knows of her community, and this makes it even more revolutionary and powerful.
Shirin, do you want to add anything to it, or?
Well, what can I say? Sometimes, we think that some Muslim countries are very strict on the hijab, and that is not true. Many years ago, I've lived in Saudi Arabia, and foreign women were not forced, like in Iran, to wear the veil. So at the end, sometimes when you are imposed to wear the veil, it is terrible, because at the end it's not something that you are feeling, it's not something spiritual. And these Muslim countries, they force you to wear the veil. So when something is forced, it is really wrong. And something that I would like that people to change their mind is, because in the West they really think that a woman who's wearing the hijab is backwards, is a woman who cannot speak her own mind. There is already this mentality, poor woman, her husband, her family told her to wear. So I think people have to be more open-minded in seeing somebody who's wearing the veil, and not just make up their mind with stereotypes or something that the media fed them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
In chapter 6 of Islam and Me, titled A Dialogue on Memory, Perspectives, Belonging, Language, and the Cultural Market, when discussing self-translation, and particularly the self-translation of the novel Nuvole sull'Equatore, Shirin claims that the urge to translate her work into English originated from a need to be able to communicate with the diaspora and the world. Having decided against finding a translator because it was too expensive, but also to avoid a literal translation, Shirin went on to translate the text herself. Can you both tell us a bit more about this collaborative effort of yours? So Shirin self-translating the text and Simone editing the translation.
Well, self-translation, I think it is not very easy, because I was not trained to be a translator. I used my everyday language, English language, to translate my own work, and I felt that freedom. And I rewrote many parts. In fact, in Lontano da Mogadiscio, some passages are completely new, written in English, and then I had to convert them from English to Italian. I mean, it's a bit crazy when you think, but when you live in an environment where everybody speaks English, slowly it becomes, you start thinking in that language, and you start understanding the culture, because when you translate, you cannot just translate without translating the culture also of the people to whom you want to reach. In fact, for me, it was very important to translate Lontano da Mogadiscio, because in Birmingham especially we have got a very, very big Somali community that speaks only English, especially the young ones. Sometimes they even don't speak good Somali. So for me to make my word or my work and my voice share it, the translation was very important. In fact, translation gave me the opportunity also to work with universities, to be read by students. It was a very big step for me, really. The translation gave me this big opportunity, and working with Simone and editing it, it was a good step. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, editing a text, editing especially a life story, such a personal, intimate text such as Islam and Me is a challenge. Editing is always a sort of violence to the text. You need to create trust, respect to the voice of the author, etc. And I'm really grateful for Shirin for the dialogue that we have created that allow us to trust each other. Something that I really like about the text that we wrote together, that you mentioned, Maria, was the ways in which our voices somehow intersperse. Sometimes I quote Shirin's words in my own text, and perhaps some and then the parts were shaped really by reading what the other had to say, and reflecting it in the text. We actually have two versions of this text. In the original version, we had the two texts facing each other, really creating this kind of a parallel dialogue. But what I think this text is perhaps more than a translation. No, it is really an experiment in translanguaging. It was, both for Shirin and for myself. When we write, we already live at least, across two languages. Which we constantly use two languages. So I think. It was quite, we already, the ways in which we write in English and in Italian is informed by the other language, So it was very interesting, this kind of dialogue, because precisely because we spoke, between these two languages. This text, the collaboration is really key to our approach to make this work, because racism is a problem, and discrimination is a problem that really poisons our communities, our society. Is something that we need to work together, going beyond perhaps polarized or identitarian positions to kind of find a common ground, and this is what we have tried to do with this text. And also, I would like to just one last comment on the ways in which foreign terms are introduced in the text. In the original text by Shirin in 1994, we have English, we have footnotes translating text in some words in Somali. In the new edition, we have tried to integrate this translation within the text. These may seem like small adjustments to the text, but in fact, I believe, and we believe, because we have discussed this, they actually involved a different positioning of Shirin with respect to the multiple languages that she uses, the multiple communities to which she belongs, to which, well, she and myself too, we belong. So I think language and the use of translanguaging is really political. Still, language discrimination is something that happens. Most migrants have an accented voice, and we need to unthink the relationship between language, nation, blood, in many, multiple ways. And I think Islam and Me is an attempt to perhaps unthink this relationship.
Thank you. Thank you, Shirin, for reminding us that the translation of a language always goes hand in hand with the translation of a culture as well. And thank you, Simone, for clarifying the way you operate when you translate and self-translate a text. And I find it very fascinating. I'm sure it'd be of inspiration for scholars and translators as well. This is on the difficulty of migrant authors to access the literary market. So the stigma attached to migrant literature that I mentioned before. Simone, you say elsewhere that migrant writers, they feel space invaders of Italian literature. And how can collaboration between scholars and writers of the kind that you two put into practice in Islam and Me help question a traditional model of knowledge production, one where the male white academic has the last word on the work of an Italian African writer? And how can it shape a more inclusive academic field?
Yeah, I think I think as we said before, there are still many difficulties, many structural difficulties to read. To kind of understand the importance of these texts, because we have been trained in literature departments in school to kind of see national literature, the canon, to recognize beauty only in certain types of work. So really, the work that we need to do is to unthink the ways in which we conceive national literature, the ways in which we think about identity and communities, really, because the question of the canon is so much related to the question of who we are, no? And very often this identity is excludes is built on the exclusion of other subjectivities. So I have just learned a lot from Shirin, from our collaboration. I think her voice is very important, and perhaps there is definitely and I think perhaps in academia we need to work more to create a space for other for voices like the one of Shirin, to actually to make them available, and perhaps to perhaps rethink or unthink the ways in which we think about cultural criticism or the canon, etc.
Okay, I have one question for Shirin, then one for Simone, and then one final question for both of you, and then we can get questions from the audience. Shirin, to what extent do you see your work as politically committed or impegnato, to use a well-known expression by Jennifer Burns, and what do you think is the impact of your work?
I would like to say that the word politically committed is a bit big. Because the politics often is very manipulative and for specific reasons. I write stories, very simple stories of other people or personal stories. Like, for example, in Nuvole sull'Equatore, Clouds over the Equator, I just wanted to remind the period, the colonial period, that of these kids who are abandoned by their father. And it's a period that has been forgotten and erased by the memory of the Italians. So in order to start a discussion and not to forget and give dignity to these hundreds of mixed children. So my contribution, my little stories in a way, is to change the Eurocentric mentality and the Eurocentric focus, and to give space to other voices too. Because Europe is made of people who come from other countries and integrate and in this territory, and is also part of Europe's past, also colonial past. Sometimes we give voice to, let's say, when there is something very radical, if somebody is against the hijab, or her father was beating her, or there was a teacher, Quranic teacher, that was then, this kind of stories, they make, headlines, and that book sells. But simple stories that are reality of everyday life of millions of other Muslim women are forgotten. So I think that we need some balance in a way, also in the editorial, in the publishing business, let's say, books that we read, not only sensational stories that capture the mind and gives only this stereotype way of thinking.
Brilliant, thank you. I know these are very important questions, and I could go on discussing them forever, but I should also keep an eye on time. So just two more quick questions. Simone, you said that migration literature completely changed my perception of what I considered Italian literature. And I think this is an extremely important point. Could you tell us a bit more about it?
Yeah, I think, I think we have to think more of, I think we have to think about culture in a way in which it reflects the ways in which Italian, whatever that means, culture is practiced and operated. First of all, when we think about Italy, we cannot only think about mainland Italy. Italian culture is produced also elsewhere, is produced in many discourses about Italy, are produced in multiple other languages. They are, the culture to which we feel we belong to is the result of multiple interactions with multiple people, of the movement of multiple people. And basically, I think the exercise that Shirin's work somehow invites us to do is to place migration instead of territory of the nation at the center of our reflection. If we try to do this exercise, definitely the perspective from which we look at Italy, to which we look at belonging, changes dramatically, and this can only be beneficial, no? In relation specifically to Islam, if we perhaps place, the multiple interactions that Italy has with Islam, our perception of the country changes a lot. And it's actually very interesting to read Shirin's work in connection with another important book that definitely inspired our dialogue, which is Charles Baudet book on Islam in Italy, because it shows how much Muslims are spoken for in Italy, and Shirin instead invites us to reverse the gaze, invites us to change the narrative, and to do what Chiamananda Ngozi Adichie said, to think about another narrative of narrating about Italy. This is perhaps something that I feel very urgent as an Italian studies scholar working in an English department, actually.
That's true. Okay, one last question. In the novel Nuvole sull'Equatore, Shirin, you tackle the issue of meticciato, and Simone has called Islam and Me very fittingly a meticcio text. to emphasize its hybrid nature. And in doing so, he has also positively resignified the term meticcio that hasn't always been used with a positive connotation. Can we delve a bit more into the polysemy of the word and its resignification?
I'm very glad that meticcio is seen in a positive connotation. I am a meticcia. My father is Pakistani, my mother is Somali. Many of us have English father and Italian. So meticcio, something meticcio for me, it has always been something positive. Only that when I was growing up in Somalia, meticci, it was very derogative, especially meticci Italo-Somali, because they were not belonging to both communities, and it was very derogative because it was kids whose fathers abandoned them. They were growing up in this collegi with nuns. They were really separated from the Somali society, so they were baptized with they had Christian name. They couldn't speak Somali, so they didn't have even to communicate with their own mother who was speaking Somali. So they were, and the Somalis were not accepting them because they were Christians, and they were kids that, because the children, they belonged to their father. So meticcio was really a very, very bad way of derogative of saying. And thank God that the word meticcio is seen in a positive way, because for my personal experience, meticcio is something beautiful, is something nice, because when you mix things, when you exchange ideas, it's something positive. And I think Simone has much more to say in an academic way what meticcio means now today in academia.
Well, no, I mean, just very shortly, I don't have much to add to what Shirin already said. But basically, all culture is the product of meticciato. We are all meticci, but definitely, but of course, I mean, saying that we are all meticci, I don't want to erase my privilege as a white man, but is definitely we are the result of different cultural encounters of people who have different backgrounds, etc. But we wanted to reappropriate this term since it was so important in the colonial project. To create a division, to create a separation. And of course, there is a huge legacy of this, colonial mindset in today's Italy. And so we wanted to celebrate meticciato, but of course, I mean, we are part of a broader community which celebrates meticciato. There is Roma Meticcia, Bologna Meticcia. Wuming used meticciato in his work with Wuming II used meticciato in his work with Antar Mohamed, and there are several other examples. So we just wanted to be part of that story, to that contestation of this separation, which we feel very uncomfortable with.
Thank you. Thank you, both of you. Is there any quick question from the audience? I think, yeah, Godela would like to ask a question.
Okay, well, thank you so much. That was really, really great, really fascinating. And I just wanted to, well, first of all, I wanted to say thank you for this model of dialogic writing, which you also did for our volume on small minority and minor literatures. And I think it's a model. It's a model for all academics to think about, because it gives the voice to both the writer and the academic. So I think that worked extremely well. But what I wanted to ask was to come back to what you said about writing as an Italian, and then Simone was suggesting this idea of putting migration at the center of thinking Italianness. So it's this idea, isn't it, of a post-migrant society. And I was wondering, to what extent, Shirin, to what extent do you think that reaching out, collaboration across different migrant communities is important? And are you able to do that? Is that something that you can do with your writing?
I think giving voices to migrants in a way, is always very important, because in our everyday life, we don't meet people that are of different cultures. Also here in Birmingham, we have a lot of people coming from different countries, but people tend to stay in their own communities, in their own, comfort zone. So it's very difficult for this exchange unless, one is a writer or a group of people who want to exchange ideas. So it is important to have this kind of conversation and to hear different voices from people who come from other countries also. And always this label of migrant, it puts people also sometimes into cages, I think, because we have multiple identities in a way, and in something that we choose, but sometimes it's the other person who's looking at us that puts the label on us. And this is very peculiar, because the way we dress or the color of our skin, and they already decide who we are. But it's not like this. It's only when we open, when we talk, when we have this kind of conversation that we can break this kind of mentality or idea that we have of the other person. Maybe I went out of your question, or I didn't understand it well. But I'm glad also I saw you, because Godela ways sexes, I know. So now I have the face of the person. It's really nice to see you.
Great.
Perhaps if you can add one small thing about that, there is an entire chapter in Shirin's book, Islamophobia, which is all about, it has all names of the people she has spoken with, who have shared their experience. No, there is, by reading this text, there is really the idea there is a multi-voiced text, because there are so many other voices inside with their names, which are the result of, this dialogue. So, yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, and we have one more question from Arzaghi.
Hello, Shirin and Simone. That was very, very interesting. Thank you very much. Going back to Meticciato, I am interested to know, and this is particularly for specifically for Shirin, and it is more of a personal question. How known are you in Somalia, or for that reason in Pakistan? Are you published there? And do you have, and this is what I'm more interested in, do you have a desire to be known in those countries, in those communities as a writer? How important is it to you to be known there, if it is?
Such an interesting question that nobody ever asked me this, but normally, let's start with Pakistan. Pakistan is so far from my culture, because my dad was born in Zanzibar. He was from Pakistani origin, and he came to Somalia. So he even didn't speak Urdu with me, and this is what I regret, because it's a language he spoke in Italian to me. In Italian. So it's so funny, a Pakistani father from origin. So I knew my grandparents that were living in Zanzibar and then in Mombasa. But going back to what the Somali community around the world, the new generation, they quite know my work and they appreciate my work. In Somalia now, a lot of texts written in the Somali language are there. And I really would like somebody to translate my work, because I'm not able to translate it into Somali. I didn't learn how to write Somali, but I can speak fluently Somali, and spoken Somali and written Somali is quite different because of the grammar. Somali language that I speak is, let's say, un po' come un dialetto di Benadir. It's more juicy, it's sweet, it's nice, but grammatically, when you have to write, it's completely different. Of course, I would like to be known also in Somalia, but Somalia now, it has more other problems than knowing and you know, they have so many other problems to solve, and I'm very glad that nowadays a lot of Somali writers that write in Somali are becoming more and more popular.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I know that Simone really has to go. So I would just like to say thank you, Shirin, thank you, Simone, for a most stimulating dialogue and for raising such important topics today and for setting new priorities for us scholars working in European literatures and for inspiring us to welcome a plurality of voices and to make European literature less Eurocentric. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
My pleasure. Okay. We are overrunning a bit, but these were really important questions, and I'm sure they can forgive us from the audience, I hope. So next is my paper on Shirin's work, Lontano da Mogadiscio. So I will just share my screen because I have a PowerPoint presentation to share with you. Lontano da Mogadiscio is an autobiographically inspired hybrid text. It narrates Shirin's experience as a Somali Italian Muslim woman. It is made of different sections which recount Shirin's memories of pre-war Mogadishu, her migration for political reasons under Siad Barre's dictatorship, and her experience settling in northern Italy in the 80s, so before the major migration flows. It is a pioneer text in Italian post-colonial literature, for it is one of the first to be written without the help of an Italian co-author, and for this reason, one of the first to ever present Italy from the point of view of the formerly colonized subject, inspiring and influencing subsequent generations of migrant writers. As Simone Brioni points out, Ijaba Shego, who is a well-known voice in Italian contemporary literature, she acknowledges her debt to Shirin's work. The text is marked by a double movement between nostalgia for the home that's been left behind and a painful confrontation with the host country's inhospitality. Of her arrival in Novara, in the Piedmont region in the north of Italy, the author records the sense of estrangement that she experienced back then, which corroborates the assumption that, as Lombard Diop and Romeo remind us, and I quote, Italianità seems unattainable for Black Italians, for Italianness and Blackness remain two mutually exclusive concepts. Despite mastering the language thanks to the bilingual education that she received in Somalia, Shirin is still subject to marginalization on account of her skin color. All around me there lied a grey city where no one knew my name, but only the color of my skin. I worked on the Italian original, where I got the quotes that you have on the slides. The translations here are my translations. So I would just like to say that there's an official English translation that came out in 2013. And this is an expanded version of the text, and that has been self-translated by Shirin herself. What you have on the slide here is also what Novara looked like in the 70s, so just about the time when Shirin migrated there. Shirin feels uneasy at being the only person of color in an otherwise perfectly white community, where they knock at a door with a pretext to borrow a cup of sugar, when in fact they're moved by the curiosity towards whom they see as a bestia rara, a rare beast. In confirmation of the fact that race is a social construct, it is her arrival in Italy that makes her aware of her Blackness. It was my arrival in a provincial town in Italy that made me aware of the color of my skin for the first time. The Somali community where I was born was multi-ethnic. Different communities lived peacefully in it. Shirin realizes that she is non-white because people call her and make her feel as such. The nostalgic reference to her life in Somalia that immediately follows the acknowledgement of her skin color shows us, by contrast, that race, much in the same way as gender is but a contingent historical artifact. Butler's theory of performativity can help underscore this last point. According to Butler, to say that gender is performative is to say that it is produced by a continuous repetition of the conventions that regulate the social world we inhabit, conventions whose reiteration makes them appear as natural. Though their naturalness is a mere illusion, it is an effect of their reiteration. So this idea of gender as something that it is performed is crucial in grasping the constructedness of any identitarian anchoring, including race. And this is well encapsulated in the disbelief of a Somali acquaintance of the author's, Farouk, who has been in Italy for many years and who masters the Italian language perfectly, and he still cannot come to terms with this habit of labeling everything and everybody. For Butler, language creates identity, drawing on linguistics as for the strength of certain utterances to bring into existence that which they name. She maintains that bodies are not merely described, but constituted by assigning them a meaning that has no existence outside of discourse. It follows then that labels such as Marocchino, Moroccan, extracomunitario, non-European, negro, wukumpra, street peddler, far from denoting an inborn prediscursive essence, are brought into existence in and through language and its sedimentation and naturalization over time, reminding us of the power of words, which do not just present an objective and neutral reality, but continuously represent, create, and recreate reality itself. Shirin is a non-white subject performing as white, hence the disbelief of the white Italians around her. While it is true that the performance of one's Blackness serves to confirm built-in assumptions regarding race and normativity, it is also true that its reiteration allows some scope for repeating it differently. For, as Fleetwood maintains, and I quote, through its circulation, Blackness attaches to bodies and narratives coded as such, but always already exceeds these attachments, end of quote. The process of signification that subtends postcoloniality and the construction of the category of the immigrant is made emblematic in the text when Shirin's neighbor knocks at the door with the excuse of having run out of sugar, when in fact she only wants to make sense of what she perceives as an incongruity between one's race and what is expected of it. So what we have on the slide here is the neighbor's reaction when she hears Shirin singing a lullaby to a newborn in the Somali language. And then Shirin switches to a well-known lullaby in the Italian language, in perfect Italian. And so the neighbor is sort of taken aback and she knocks at the door with the excuse that she wants to borrow some sugar, when in reality she wants to just to know what's going on there. While the neighbor feels reassured by the correspondence between Shirin's ethnicity and the way she articulates her speech acts, whilst singing lullabies to a little one in a native Somali language, she's taken aback at hearing her switch to a familiar Italian song by faultlessly appropriating the master's language. In confirmation of the fact that, and I quote from Fleetwood, The discourse of blackness is predicated on a knowable, visible, and performing subject, end of quote. What we have here is the fact of a Butlerian incongruity between stereotyped versions of race and reality, a confrontation with a racial other that erases difference, for the other behaves and speaks in the same way as myself, so much so that she becomes the reflection of the white subject's own self. Religion is also a divisive element in the meeting with a new culture, as becomes clear when Shirin's little niece, Nabila, insists on going out wearing a hijab, despite she's not yet reached the age that makes it mandatory for Muslim women. What for the child is nothing more than a game becomes a reason of shock for the passers-by, who, failing to understand the situation, nevertheless feel entitled to express their disappointment towards what they perceive as an unjust and outrageous imposition. Following the 9/11 terrorist attacks, the Western discourse has witnessed an exacerbation of Islamophobia, that is, an extreme fear of and prejudice against Islam and Muslims, which often leads to hate speech, hate crimes, as well as social and political discrimination. Islamophobia manifests itself in public and private spaces where Muslims are viewed as suspect and unwelcome, but also in political discourse and social media where they are portrayed as violent, misogynist, and untrustworthy. The Islamophobic and racist discourse is often linked to the derogatory description of Islam as a religion that denies women's rights, among other things. Shirin mentions, for instance, the episodes of discrimination she encounters when people question her wearing a hijab, which they see as an imposition and the epitome of women's subalternity to men, which leads her to wonder why people get so alarmed by a piece of fabric, given that in many traditions around the world, the Virgin Mary herself has traditionally been depicted as wearing a hijab, without any negative connotation attached to it. By the end of the 90s, Italy had one of the most diverse migrant communities in Europe, with migrants coming predominantly from the former African colonies, but also from Eastern Europe, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. Lombardi, Diop, and Romeo note how such heterogeneity poses strict challenges to an idea of post-coloniality that is informed neither on assimilation, as is the case of France, nor on integration, as is the case for Britain and the Netherlands. Furthermore, and specifically with regard to the Italian context, the principle of jus sanguinis, for which Italian citizenship is determined by parental citizenship as opposed to the place of birth, has added to an idea of Italianness that is no longer attainable today in light of Italy's migratory movements, both external towards other countries and internal from south to north. Texts such as Lontano da Mogadiscio, written by authors of post-colonial descent who have migrated from the African ex-colonies to the metropole, give voice to new ways of being Italian and show the anachronism implicit in any national ideal, promoting instead new concepts of blackness. Speaking from a condition of triple exclusion from gender, race, and religion, Shirin's text tackles the painful confrontation between colonizer and colonized and raises important questions about the discursive reconstruction of self and other. With regard to the relationship of the colonized with their difference to the colonizer, Fanon notably argues that the destiny of the person of color is to become whiter, only if they renounce their blackness. It follows then that the well-known trope of the white mask becomes, in Fanon's view, the aspiration to become white, and as such the epitome of the dehumanization of the colonized, who, and I quote from Fanon, lives in a society that makes his inferiority complex possible, in a society that derives its stability from the perpetuation of this complex in a society that proclaims the superiority of one race. Lontano da Mogadiscio gives voice to the ambivalent feelings towards the migrant other described by Fanon, and is apparent in the prejudiced behavior with which the local communities in Italy approach Shirin. This becomes emblematic, for instance, when the author asks for directions in perfect Italian, and people in turn answer using uninflected infinitives instead of conjugated verbs, which is the generally acknowledged stereotype of foreigner talk for immigrants of African descent in Italy, and one that is still perpetuated in literature, popular culture, and the media. A clash thus opens up between the colonized, who expresses herself in the way the colonizer does, and the colonizer, who replies in the way that is expected of the colonized. As soon as I arrived in Italy, it seemed to me that Italians were all deaf. I would ask a passerby in perfect Italian, "Excuse me, would you point out Via Montenero for me, please?" The interlocutor would look at me and start to gesticulate frantically, articulate the words in a loud voice and conjugating the verbs in the infinitive, to walk straight ahead, to see crossroad, to turn right, to find Via Montenero. The same scene would repeat itself at the market or in some shops. This puzzled me because each piece of information was repeated thousands of times over and over, as if I was deaf. I came to think that most of the people I was asking information to had not gone to school, for they were struggling with verbs. So what we witness here, with a sharp irony on the part of the author, is white Italians' reluctance to associate Italianness with blackness. For, and I quote from Lombardi Diop and Romeo, "National belonging is generally understood in terms of specific traits, both cultural and biological, that cannot be simply acquired by perfect mastery of the language and of the Italian way of life." End of quote. Such averseness to the encounter with the other emblematically highlights the dynamics of racialization and shows racial identity as the product of different variables of color, race, and gender, intersecting with one another. Shirin feels happy to be at home, by which she means Italy, soon after some travels. But her enthusiasm soon fades away when at the airport, the officer gives her inquisitive looks, as if he were surprised to face a black Italian, and scrutinizes her passport suspiciously, double-checking that all information is correct and that her name is not in some terrorist list. Passports, as philosopher Sarah Ahmed reminds us, are useful objects that allow some people to easily go through borders, whether for holiday, leisure, or business, though they do not work in the same way for everybody. Indeed, for people like Shirin, they work as normative apparatuses that make some people, rather than others, look suspicious. Passports can stop you. They hold up racially different individuals until any suspicion is lifted and they can move on. This halting has specific consequences in the orientation of people in the space they inhabit. And I think it's worth quoting from Sarah Ahmed's at length here. For bodies that are not extended by the skin of the social, bodily movement is not so easy. Such bodies are stopped, where the stopping is an action that creates its own impressions. Who are you? Why are you here? What are you doing? Each question, when asked, is a kind of stopping device. You are stopped by being asked the question, just as asking the question requires you to be stopped. A phenomenology of being stopped might take us in a different direction than one that begins with motility, with a body that can do by flowing into space. To stop involves many meanings: to seize, to end, and also to cut off, to arrest, to check, to prevent, to block, to obstruct, or to close. For bodies like Shirin's, were restricted as to what they can do and how they can move in a given space. This stop and search is a technology of racism, as Ahmed names it, that confronts them with their being out of place within an economy that favors certain individuals and considers others as strangers, as if even if they have the right passport and are in a place they rightly call their home. Comparing what she's left behind with the new reality that is by juxtaposing Somalia with Piedmont, with Novara, Shirin's narrative describes Italians' inability to conceive the possibility of becoming a multicultural society. In Lontano da Mogadiscio, Italy is not only contrasted with colorblind Somalia, the author's childhood place where racial categories have not yet been activated, but also with multicultural Great Britain. She says, I'm in London for a short holiday. I love this multi-ethnic and multicultural city. It's so different from the small town where I live in Italy. Shirin asks herself why Black is always seen as a negative. Her pondering over the negative connotations that are generally associated with dark and black as opposed to light and white underscores the perception of Italianness and Blackness as two mutually exclusive categories, an Italian resistance towards a Black identity that was all the more felt at the time the narration is set, in the 80s, and that still holds true nowadays. To conclude, the text does not lean into facile overgeneralizations, with the author instead giving voice to her personal experience of coming to terms with her ethnic, sexual, and religious difference, an experience that is rooted in and therefore dependent upon the specificity and uniqueness of each individual. Italian colonialism provides the country with a space that is both symbolical, the collective consciousness, and physical, the actual society migrants have to confront, whereby whiteness is built upon ingrained stereotypes and historical discriminations and continuously restated. At the same time, though, and as emblematically showcased in Lontano da Mogadiscio, the presence of Black Italians who, like Shirin herself, contribute to the economic and cultural prosperity of the country, perfectly mastering its language and way of life, reveals the fallacy underlying any monolithic notion of Italianness and of national identity. Thank you. Okay, how are we doing with questions? Shall we save them for later and introduce the next speaker? Okay. Let's stop. Okay. Okay, our next speaker today is Beatrice Basile. Beatrice, are you there?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Maria, first of all.
Beatrice, thank you for being here today. Beatrice's paper is titled Body, Identity and Symbols in Ijaba Shego's La Linea del Colore. Beatrice, if you would like to say a few words about yourself, and I'm looking forward to your paper.
Yes. I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate at the University of Pennsylvania, but I'm currently conducting my research in Italy as I obtained a fellowship to spend 2 years at the University of Bologna, where I'm currently visiting PhD student. My dissertation focuses on Goliardo Sapienza's work, and my research interest focuses on women writers and women studies. In my presentation today, I haven't had the chance to communicate that to you, Maria, but I will also speak about another novel from Ijaba Shego and also about La Linea del Colore. I do not have a PowerPoint, but I will read my presentation and I can start if you agree with that. Okay, thank you. Ijaba Shego's literary production, which has gained increasing recognition, appreciation, and academic study in recent years, is closely tied to the discourse on migration issues and Italy's colonial past. Over the last two decades, Ijaba Shego has authored a significant number of novels. In 2010, she won the Mondello Prize for her work titled La mia casa e dove sono. And in 2023, she made it to the final 12 contenders for the Strega Prize with her latest novel, Cassandra a Mogadiscio. Throughout her career, Shego has received numerous national and international awards for her literary contributions and recognitions for her work as a journalist. In this study, I will focus on two of her novels written a decade apart, La mia casa e dove sono and La linea del colore. Ijaba Shego was born in Rome to Somali parents in 1974. She graduated in foreign languages and literature from La Sapienza University of Rome and completed a PhD in pedagogy at the University of Roma III. From a young age, she became interested in writing in a journalistic format, particularly focusing on migration issues. She collaborated with national magazines to share her first-hand experience as a second-generation Italian. In addition to her personal experiences, Shego dedicated herself to studying the migrations of the generation before hers, particularly the experiences of women, and those of second-generation individuals born and raised in Italy today. Shego began her career as a journalist by contributing to magazines that dealt with migration, African cultures, and literatures, including Latino America, Carta, El Ghibli, and Mira. She later wrote for more well-known publications like La Repubblica, Il Manifesto, L'Unità, and L'Internazionale. Her growing interest in migration issues is evident, especially given the emergence of new Italians or second-generation Italians in the literary scene who are trying to establish themselves in an increasingly multicultural and multi-ethnic world. However, it seems that their voices are not always readily heard. As Anna Proto-Pisani has noted, Shego's journalistic writing was enriched with literary elements, employing imagery, narrative styles, and refined language that added a literary dimension to her journalistic texts. Shego's primary goal is to tell story, to testify, and she understands that enriching her accounts with literary elements and characters was a way to capture the attention of a broader audience. Readers could then imagine different worlds through fictional stories, past or present, and prevent certain stories from being forgotten forever. Shego's literary production likely originates in this journalistic and testimonial background. Her work as a journalist led her to engage in literary production in the form of a novel, such as La mia casa e dove sono, where a personal component predominates. In this memoir novel, Shego told her family's story in a language accessible to all, allowing readers to delve into a family chronicle and uncover the historical elements of Italian colonialism that had long been omitted from Italian historiography. As demonstrated in this novel, which will be discussed here as an example of translingual text, a term that I borrow from Tiziana De Rogatis, Shego's biographical condition is a testament to a female genealogy that still struggles to be included in the literary canon, despite the increasing number of testimonies from Italian writers of African origin in Italy today. In this particular case, as we'll see, Shego emphasizes the interplay of languages, Somali and Italian, both considered to her mother languages, which serve as a bridge between her two homes, Rome and Mogadiscio. And I quote from her novel, "Sono italiana ma anche no, sono somala ma anche no, un crocevia, uno svincolo, un casino, un mal di testa. Ero un animale in trappola, un essere condannato all'angoscia perenne, essere italiano per me. Poi mi sono ricordata di un racconto di Karen Blixen. Here, the reference to Karen Blixen is interesting, as it is also discussed by the philosopher Adriana Cavarero in the book Tu che mi guardi, tu che mi racconti. Like in Karen Blixen's work, later elaborated upon by Adriana Cavarero, storytelling becomes central to understanding one's own life, and more than that, personal stories, one told, become collective history. Ijaba Shego's work, like that of many others, is part of a tradition that has been ongoing for at least three decades. As Fulvio Pezzarossa rightly noted in the introduction to the volume, he wrote, and I quote, "È ormai senso comune che anche in Italia, esattamente da un ventennio, numerosi immigrati si sono affacciati all'esperienza creativa, proponendo una larga varietà di oggetti testuali che si connettono alla più larga dinamica del fatto migratorio, insinuandosi con forza innovativa all'interno del cuore simbolico della nostra identità. Furthermore, Shego's perspective is a feminine one, as she pays attention to the body, particularly the violated body, as a symbol of Italian colonial usurpation in Somalia and Ethiopia between the late 19th and early 20th century, or later during the era of fascism. Shego's work is primarily a continuous dialogue with those who came before her and couldn't speak or make their voices heard when needed, making it a form of vindication for those who, like her now, can do so to some extent. Ijaba Shego's narrative stands out for three fundamental elements. The first is that of historical memory, which is always present in her work, whether they're more or less autobiographical. Collective history memory intersects with contemporary memory and continually challenges it. Collective historical memory also becomes private memory, as it is told through the personal experience of those who experience certain situations firsthand. The second element, as I mentioned before, is translingualism, a term used by Tiziana De Rogatis, which is characterized by the necessary presence of Somali terminology alongside the Italian language, in which Shego entirely composes her literary corpus. This intersection of a mother tongue with another mother tongue, in the literal sense of the term, Shego specifies that her mother used to tell her story exclusively in Somali, confirms Tiziana De Rogatis' concept of homing. And I quote, "L'homing è una dimensione che coinvolge oggi anche chi ha sempre avuto e da molte generazioni un'unica residenza stabile e ben radicata nel mondo, come pure una sola appartenenza nazionale e linguistica." The third and final element is the question of gender and the focus on the violated body, which undoubtedly fits into a tradition that has been extensively examined thanks to the emergence of trauma studies. In this regard, it is necessary to briefly reflect on the issue of post-colonial literature as a genre in its own right. De Rogatis, in her analysis of Ijaba, another female writer, emphasizes the importance of liberating migration literature from its ghetto of minor hybrid Creole literature, internal to a specific monolingualism. As other scholars have pointed out, De Rogatis insists on this, and I quote, "Non è una questione nominalista sulla formula in sé e per sé di letteratura della migrazione, pur ultimamente descrittiva e storicamente informativa, ma sul farne o meno la prospettiva principale del discorso." Giuliana Benvenuti also suggested in her essay, "Letteratura della migrazione, letteratura postcoloniale, letteratura italiana." Aveva dichiarato che il modo migliore di affrontare le opere delle scrittori e degli scrittrici che classifichiamo sotto l'etichetta di scrittori migranti sia quello di interpretare dentro il campo della produzione letteraria contemporanea, ovvero di evitare una separazione netta tra gli scrittori italiani contemporanei e gli scrittori migranti in lingua italiana. Italian post-colonial literature arises from the need to understand and embrace new narrative forms, considering the plurality and diversity of voices and perspective it encompasses. With the emergence of new writers, these voices are becoming increasingly transversal and interdisciplinary. To achieve this, there needs to be more openness on all sides. Ijaba Shego always presents two words, Italy on one side, Somalia on the other, as in the case of La mia casa dove sono. And the United States, always in contrast to Italy in La linea del colore, seems to perfectly adhere to this type of reasoning put forward by Giuliana Benvenuti in the previously mentioned text. If it is clear that we need to question the remaining of national literature as foundational to Italian national identity, what happens when a writer defines herself as a hybrid writer and writes in Italia? Shego was born in Italy. Her mother tongue is Italian. She writes, thinks, and dreams in Italian, but the Somali component is predominant in her identity formation. And I quote, "La prima lingua che ho parlato è stato l'italiano, ma tutte le ninne nanne e le canzoncine erano in somalo. Ogni tanto mio padre ci infilava anche una parola di bravano. Ero molto confusa da piccola, ma era una bella confusione." Despite Italian being the first spoken language for Shego, it is not the only mother tongue in the literal sense of the term. Somali, because it's her mother's language, in the sense that her mother spoke to her in Somali because it is her language and transmits it to her through the tales and lullabies that Shego still remember. And I quote, "Così cominciano tutte le fiabe, tutte quelle che mia madre mi raccontava da piccola, fiabe splatter per lo più, fiabe tarantinate di un mondo nomade che non badava a merletti e crinoline. Nelle fiabe di mamma non esistevano principesse, palazzi, balli e scarpe. Le sue storie riflettevano il mondo in cui era nata lei. La boscaglia della Somalia orientale dove uomini e donne si spostavano di continuo in cerca di pozzi d'acqua. Beyond the mother's language, which transforms Shego's narrative into an operation of polyglossia, of language, culture, and storytelling, there is undoubtedly an attention to the maternal history, as pointed out in the text, and I quote, "Era una vita dura, quella che mamma Cadia trascorse fino a 9 anni. Già da piccola era un buon pastore, mungeva capre e mucche, badava ai cammelli, cucinava il riso con la carne e non si lamentava mai per i calli ai piedi che le spuntavano ogni migrazione della sua famiglia allargata." For Shego, understanding her mother's history becomes necessary to understand her origins and reflect on her heritage. The difficulty of being born and raised in a country that has suffered violence and oppression for European colonizers is evident from the early pages of this memoir, which is a way for the writer to remember the colonial past experienced by her family members and the collectivity. All the hardships her family endured are transmitted to a young Ijaba throughout the tales, so close to real life that connect us to the ancestral world of our ancestors. The mother's tale, the first tales told to Ijaba, and their first direct contact with Somalia, opened the door to the female universe, which, as mentioned earlier, is one of the characteristics of Shego's prose. Her mother's stories certainly stand out in telling her family's story. And I quote, "Mamma non serva rancore. Mi ha sempre detto si faceva, era tradizione. Nessuno aveva detto ai miei genitori, ai loro genitori, che era una tradizione crudele." As she recounts the cruel practice of female circumcision endured by her mother when she was very young, the writer recalls when, on a trip to Somalia in 1980s, her aunts told her that she would undergo the same procedure, but she was brave enough to oppose to it, reminding them that her mother had promised her that she would not suffer the same fate. And I quote, La volontà di mia madre e la sua esperienza di dolore mi hanno permesso di essere una donna completa, con tutti gli organi al posto giusto. Ecco perché mi sento una mappa di mamma. Lei mi ha disegnato intera, senza omissioni né tagli. Shego's memoir serves the reader to reconstruct a map not only of the places of her family of origin, but also to understand many things about today's Italy. At the end of the story, Ijaba, who had never seen Mogadishu, the capital of Somalia, is taken back and only finds answers to some questions much later. She begins to map out the places of her childhood, such as Sistina Theatre, Piazza Santa Maria sopra Minerva, the Stele of Aksum, Termini Station, Trastevere, and rethinks them in relation to Somalia, explaining why she feels at home in certain places. Shego's translingualism is accentuated at the end of her novel, where she proudly declares that she can now use Somali when she returns home. And I quote, «Ma fu solo quando tornai in Somalia che ricominciai a usare la lingua di mia madre. Nell'arco di pochi mesi mi ritrovai a parlare il somalo molto bene. Ora posso dire di avere 2 lingue madri che mi amano in egual misura. Grazie alla parola ora sono quella che sono». After reflecting on her own story in the novel we just discussed, La linea del colore, which was released 10 years later, Ijaba Shego once again employs the narrative technique that uses a polyphony of voices and tells the stories of 3 women in 2 different historical times. These women cross borders and all face a type of danger and violence, both verbal and physical, to occupy the space they inhabit. Shego emphasizes the forgotten colonial past once again, creating a different genealogy from the previous mother-daughter genealogy. The novel's protagonists, Lefanu, Leila, and Binti, need each other to understand their history fully, and it is through this intergenerational exchange, historical consciousness becomes self-awareness, and memory becomes a way to break free from ancestral stereotypes. The novel tells the story of Leila, an Italian girl of Somali origin who studies the motif of enslaved Black people in some works of art in Italy. She stumbles upon the story of Lefanu Brown, an American painter of Chippewa origin, who moved to Italy from the United States at the end of the 19th century to study art. Amid Leila's adventures in trying to reconstruct and understand Lefanu's history, a figure from the past, appears Binti, Leila's cousins, who remains in Somalia and tries in every way to reach her cousin in Italy in the hope of starting a better life. The lives of these 3 women intertwine because they all, in different ways, seek a form of freedom that they struggle to find. Lefanu, at the end of the 19th century in Rome, was undoubtedly targeted because of her skin color, particularly in defense of soldiers sent to fight in the Italian colonies in Ethiopia or Eritrea. Leila, on the other hand, while studying artworks and conducting archival research to learn more about Lefanu tries to help her cousin Binti, and I quote, «Ero immersa nella foresta amazzonica quando mi arrivò un messaggio. Era Binti, la mia cugina 20enne, che mi stava scrivendo dalla Somalia. Ci volevamo molto bene, anche se non ci eravamo mai viste. Succede spesso tra somali, chi è rimasto al paese, chi è emigrato chissà dove, e così in un soffio ci si perde di vista, ma non del tutto, con le tecnologie moderne, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, WhatsApp, è impossibile sparire. Non è come ai tempi di Lefanu Brown, quando le separazioni erano nette e definitive. Io e Binti avevamo cominciato a scriverci quando lei aveva compiuto 13 anni, era stata lei a farsi avanti. Ci scrivevamo in inglese, lo sto studiando, mi disse, e mi piace, quando un giorno sarò lontano da qui mi servirà, tutti parlano inglese. Unfortunately, something goes wrong, and when Binti decides to cross borders to reach Europe, she's stopped. Leila is immediately worried when she receives a call from an hospital, but she is reassured that Binti is safe and has not suffered violence, yet she's not sure. Just as Lefanu was attacked on the street at the end of the 19th century because of her skin of color, Binti's body is violated nowadays as as Shego states, in a dystopic moment. In the same logic we discussed earlier, and the attention to the female experience, Ijaba Shego delves into the experience of these three women who, even though they live in a different times and place, seem to speak to each other and share a common destiny to which Leila is a direct witness and to which only she can give a voice. To tell Lefano's story, Leila becomes the spokesperson for a history that does not directly belong to her, but she soon discovered that it belongs to her more than she imagined. She, an Italian of Somali origin, at times perceives the bewildered looks directed at her. Leila finds herself in a middle position between two women, Lefano and Binti, who have crossed or attempted to cross a space to build a new home and have faced the consequences of doing so. As in the memoir, Ejaba Shego employs the same narrative device in the novel, La linea del colore. Leila appears to be somewhat like Ijaba in her autobiography, La mia casa è dove sono, occupying a third space, as Bahaba would say, that is a border, a liminal space, which she has the privilege to cross, unlike others, but it is still a double-edged sword. To use Bahaba's metaphor, I conclude by saying that the margins between the Italian and Somali words are sutured, which Ijaba experienced firsthand. It's a direction that Italian literature should take, continuing to explore these complex and nuanced narratives.
Thank you, Beatrice, and congratulations on your fellowship.
Thank you.
Your reference to the Rogatis made me think of Avital Bra's concept of homing desires and the idea that home is a mobile signifier. So home is not something that's been left behind once and for all, but it is a space and a place that can be recreated anew every time. But my question is on the canon and migration literature and the space of migration literature, the position of migration literature within the canon and the position of Ijaba Shego within migration literature and therefore within the canon of Italian literature.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Maria. It's a very good point since, well, as you all know, there's this debate currently going on the what should be included in the Italian tradition Italian canon of literature, which authors should be included and other authors like to be excluded. And of course, and as I mentioned before, there are many studies on post-colonial literatures, migration literature that certainly include those that are called by many scholars, especially in Italy, new Italians that have written about their experiences as second generation Italian or Italian citizens that have obtained their citizenships maybe after they came from another country. And I would say that, of course, if an author consider herself or himself as an Italian author and writes in Italian because the Italian language is what the author consider its mother tongue, I would say that why not? Should it be included in the canon? I don't know if others have other thoughts about that. I think it's something that people have been debating about for a while. But I think that, I mean, if to the author extent, should be the author that must have a word on that by saying if if they consider themselves part of a literature or not.
Okay, yes, thank you, Beatrice. And this links in well with what Simone said before about migrant literature. We have time for one more question before the break. So if there's one more question from the audience, just feel free to ask away. I can't see any questions, can you? No. Oh, there's one question. Okay. Audrey West, yeah. I will unmute you in a second. Could you, Audrey, could you unmute yourself? Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for your talks. As I'm listening, I am thinking about, some of you will know this book. It's Genes, People and Languages. Do you know this one? Genes, People and Languages, and it's by Luigi Luca Cavalli-Sforza. And it demonstrates the way that race does not exist, how humans have traveled from out of Africa, and how we've come to where we are now. And I'm sort of conscious of the fact that we're going over and round in circles, trying to describe ourselves as humans and by color. And I'm grateful for the journeys that people are describing in fiction. But I'm at the point, and I think a lot of us are at the point where humanity needs to recognize that we are all human and we are different people, but we are all human. And we have the scientific evidence and we're not paying attention. Now, this is an emotional contribution because obviously I believe in literature. I'm a champion of literature. But also I believe that literature needs to embed the science that we've got, and we need to refer to it because it is there and it's not been referenced enough. And we're still confused because of the polarities that we've constructed over nationhood, over identities, out of nationality. And obviously I'm sort of saying this with this huge flag over our head at the moment, or chopping, the things that are going on in terms of war. So I'm actually I'm pleading and invoking us to really keep the work doing. But literature creates and changes, but also science does. And I hope we contribute to the two things in our work. Thank you. So sorry, that was a preaching rather than a question. I'm so sorry.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Is there anyone who would like to add something to it? Shirin, maybe, since we have a protagonist of Italian literature here. But thank you.
The only thing I would like to add is just something small, like Beatrice said, that if you think in Italian and you speak in Italian and you feel Italian, I think you should be included in the Italian literature. And okay, when you label things like migrant literature, it's maybe useful only when you have to research something. Otherwise, we are in the same, let's say, because the literature that comes from foreign people who feel Italian, it always enriches it's a meticciato, like Simone was saying, and meticciato is always positive. It brings something new. It opens the eyes. It shows us how people perceive us and how we perceive the world. This is what I just wanted to add to.
Yes, thank you. Brilliant.
Hi, everybody. So thank you all for coming back. It looks like everybody's back out of the waiting room. So this is the second half of the conference on Women in Islam, Agency in Francophone and Italophone Autobiography. So this part we will be looking at the French context through three papers. And already, sort of based on the paper that I'll be giving, I can see that there are similarities that are emerging from what's been discussed earlier. So what we're going to do, we're basically going to do the three papers. It looks like we're down one paper, but that will allow us time to discuss papers that have been delivered and potentially any questions from earlier. And there's a slight difference in the order of the papers. So we're going to start with Mehrnoosh, followed by Farzaneh, and then followed by me. We're going to stick to 20 minutes each as the maximum. We'll do a timer, and we'll give you just a 5-minute prompt, so you've got 5 minutes left, and then we'll do all the questions at the end. So for each person that is going to present, do a brief introduction about yourself, your background, and then if you could go straight into the paper, and then we will time you from there, if that's okay. So we'll start with Mehrnoosh. So welcome, Mehrnoosh. Over to you.
Yes, it's a pleasure of being here today as a part of this conference. My name is Mehrnoosh Arzaghi, and I come to you as a French translator, literature critic, and researcher. In addition to my academic pursuit, I'm honored to serve as a co-founder of Mashq School, which is a literary cultural institute in Tehran. I hold a PhD in French literature, and my recent publications, such discussed from victim role in Heroes of Persian novel and post-structuralist feminist reading of Assia Jabbar, Fantasia and Algerian Calcavit, based on Lucy Rigaray and Helen Sixou theories, reflect my engagement with feminist ideas. And currently, my research interests revolve around Francophone feminine literature and narratology. Thank you for having me, and thank you, Maria, for answering my question on emails during this time. I look forward to enrich my insights here. I'm honored to present my research on Assia Jabbar's portrayal of women in Les Femmes d'Alger dans l'appartement and Femmes sans sépulture, navigating paradoxes of language, identity, and women voices. Assia Jabbar is an internationally renowned Algerian author whose work have been translated into 21 languages. Her writing focuses on themes such as women's emancipation, history, and Algeria seen through its violence and languages, and explore the complexities of identity, particularly the experience of Algerian women living under the French colonialism and during the Algerian War of Independence. In this presentation, I will analyze the image of women in two of Jabbar's important works and explore how these images contribute to Jabbar's search for identity. In chapter 1, a language outside of the language. In understanding Jabbar's portrayal of women, it's crucial to explore her paradoxical relationship with the French language. As a colonized Algerian, French was the language of the oppressor. However, it becomes Jabbar's language of writing and self-expression. Jabbar's writing embodies a unique duality, allowing her to traverse both sides of the language to connect with the host culture without becoming a stranger, enemy, or victim. She coins the terms Francography to describe her writing style, which merged the French language and literary tradition with non-French cultural and linguistic influences. Through code switching, Jabbar frequently switches between French, Arabic, and Berber languages within her text. The linguistic fluidity not only reflects on her complex identity as an Algerian woman writing in a language associated with colonialism, but also represent the multilingual and multicultural nature of Algerian society. Code switching serves a multiple purpose. Code switching serves multiple purposes in Jabbar's works. It conveys a sense of identity, allowing the speaker or writer to navigate various linguistic and cultural contexts. Jabbar's use of French alongside Arabic and Algerian dialect challenges linguistic hierarchies and power dynamic, asserting her own cultural and linguistic identity while subverting the dominance of French as a colonial language. Furthermore, code switching enriches the reader's understanding by highlighting the linguistic cultural diversity of the author and the society being depicted. Jabbar's writing also embraces hybridity, blending different literary forms and genres. Autobiography, history, and fiction intertwine to create a nuanced representation of Algerian culture and history. For instance, in her collection of short stories titled Les Femmes d'Alger dans leur appartement, Woman of Alger in Their Apartment, Jabbar combines fiction and autobiography to explore the lives of Algerian women, addressing themes of patriarchy, colonialism, and identity. Similarly, her autobiographical novel, Femme sans sépulture, Woman Without a Grave, fuses history, memoir, and fiction to depict her own experience growing up in Algeria and the broader lives of Algerian women. This blending of styles and forms allows Jabbar to present a multifaceted and imaginative portrayal of Algerian society. By cultural references play a significant role in Jabbar's work as she incorporates non-French cultural and literary tradition by referencing Algerian history, culture, and figures. She confronts Algeria's colonial past and explores the country's complex relationship with France. Jabbar celebrates Algerian culture and history, shedding light on marginalized elements and asserting the importance of Algeria's identity. Moreover, her use of cultural references allows her to explore the intersection of different traditions, highlighting the diverse influences that have shaped Algerian society over time. In chapter 2, titled Arab Woman, Arable Woman, Jabbar marks the history of a colonized and decolonized country, offering us an alternative perspective on women's voice. The voicing belongs to women who tell their own stories. The fictional female voice that resonates throughout the narrative defy traditional feminine condition in Algeria, hinting at act of transgression. In Les Femmes d'Alger dans leur appartement, Woman of Alger in Their Apartment, Assia Jabbar explored the lives of Algerian women who grapple with the cultural restriction and societal norms. The book vividly portrays a diverse range of female characters, each navigating their own struggle and aspiration. From the young bride yearning for freedom to the elder woman reflecting on her lost opportunities, Jabbar breathes life into their stories by challenging the Orientalist fantasy depicted in Delacroix's painting. Jabbar's reclaim the narrative and confronts the stereotype imposed on these women. The famous painting by Eugène Delacroix, Women of Alger in Their Apartment, captures beauty, emotion, and exotism and meticulous attention to details. The apartment resembling the harem remains a sacred space accessible only to the husband. Delacroix managed to cross the threshold of this magical place with the help of a friend. Asiya Jabars follows a similar pattern at the crossroad of the text and image. Meticulous and focused, she immerses herself in family dramas, confronts conflict, and delves into the intimate space where her character resides. With a watchful eye, she scrutinizes every gesture and word, as if she has just stepped out of the harem and is eager to describe it. She still glances at those who suffer, those who cry, to unbeknownst to them, and they are subject of literary study or a study that centers of the fate of women. In Arab world, women bear the stigma of invisibility, perpetually hidden. Even Delacroix's women are absent to themselves, to their bodies, to their sensitivity and happiness. The relationship between text and image is this distinct feature of Jabbar's writing, particularly evident in a short story of Women of Algiers. It is a remarkable aspect because Jabars liberate Arab women from the confines capture created by painters, ensuring physical emancipation by freeing them from the spaces like harem. Furthermore, it represents a metaphysical emancipation by giving voice to women and breaking their silence. Jabbar's work challenges traditional notion of femininity in Arab world on multiple levels. Firstly, her writing amplifies the voice of women who have long been silenced or marginalized in Arab societies. Through her stories, she highlights their experience and perspective, which are often disregarded in male-dominated societies. Secondly, Jabbar's work disrupts the notion of invisible woman in Arab world. Traditional Arab society expect women to be modest, obedient, and confined to the private realms of the home. Jabbar's stories defy this notion by portraying women as active, independent, and assertive individuals who refuse to be confined to traditional gender roles. Lastly, Jabbar's works challenges the portrayal of Arab women as a passive victim. In many Western narratives, Arab women are depicted as a helpless victim of patriarchal oppression, lacking agency or power. Jabbar's story, however, presents Arab women as an agent of change who resist and challenge patriarchal norms and structures. Chapter 3, titled Nomadism, Writing in Movement. In this chapter, we explore the various forms of exile present in Asiya Jabbar's writing and analyze their consequence on her literary expression. We emphasize the exile is not only geographical, but also a complex relationship with memory. Jabbar skillfully employs the notion of wandering, exile, and nomadism to articulate the fluidity of her writing as exemplified in L'étranger, pas tellement l'étranger, a stranger, not so much a stranger. Furthermore, we analyze Jabbar's narrative choices in constructing La Femme sans sépulture, Woman Without a Grave, where she addresses both historical and ideological aspects of the colonial and post-colonial context. Woman Without a Grave tells a story about Zolikha, a forgotten heroine of war who resist French rule in Algeria. Through this novel, Jabbar gives voices to women's resistance and agency within Algerian society, intertwining the personal and the political to reveal the complexities of women's experiences in the face of oppression. Zolikha embarks on a courageous journey, defying the oppressive force and ultimately making the ultimate sacrifice. Jabbar's character, perpetually in a search of refuge, are unable to settle in the present. They wander through time and space, finding only in the spaces tied to their childhood, closely intertwined with Césarée, its ancestral culture and the ancient history. However, in these nostalgic realms of the past, Jabbar's character cannot find the complete peace or comfortable sanctuary. Nevertheless, the sense of being a nomad, an eternal stranger, proves to be not entirely detrimental to the narrator. In fact, it allows her to revisit the landscape of her childhood and reanimate memories with a fresh perspective. Atentuber's exploration of exile in her writing is intimately connected to her own personal experience as an Algerian writer and filmmaker. She witnesses the oppressive nature of French colonial rule, significantly influencing her understanding of identity, memory, and displacement. Moreover, her own years of living in exile due to political circumstances, particularly during the Algerian Civil War, profoundly shaped her exploration of these themes in her works. Through her characters and narratives, Jebel delves into complexities of exile, which encompasses physical displacement from one's homeland to the experience of straddling different cultural languages and identities. She examined the impact of exile on individuals and communities, the loss of connection to one's root, and the perpetual search for a sense of belonging. Jebel also emphasized the power of storytelling and literature as a vehicle for reclaiming personal and collective histories, giving voice to silence and bridging the gap caused by exile. In conclusion, we can say that Jebel's exploration of exile in her writing provides a rich and personal perspective on the profound effect of displacement on individuals and societies. By intertwining her own experience with the narratives of her character, she offers a nuanced understanding of the complexities and consequences of exile, ultimately emphasizing the resilience and agency of those who resist and navigate the challenging of being uprooted. A Woman Without a Grave exemplifies Jebel's ability to illuminate the forgotten heroine and their stories, ultimately contributing to a broader understanding of women's resistance and agency in Algerian society. In conclusion, Asiya Jebel's work serves as a powerful testament to her own life experience and her quest for identity. Through her writing, she boldly amplified the voice of silenced Algerian women, challenging and reshaping traditional notion of femininity within the Arab world. Jebel's portrayal of female character encompasses various dimensions. Firstly, her character exhibits agency and independence, defying the prevalent perception of women as a passive and submissive. They actively curve their own path, make choices, and assert their desire and aspiration. Jebel's narrative showcased the resilience and determination of these women. Secondly, Jebel confronts and subverts patriarchal structure and power dynamic ingrained with Arab societies. She shed light on limitations imposed on women, advocating for their freedom and autonomy. Her work serves as a powerful critique and societal norms that confines women to private sphere and the confines to the harem. Thirdly, Jebel reclaims the voices and the experiences of women within historical context, highlighting their active participation and agency during a significant period. By challenging the prevailing notion of women as a passive bystander, she positioned them as a crucial contributor who shaped their own destinies. Her narratives provides a more inclusively and accurate representation of history. Moreover, Jebel's work redefine and expand the understanding of femininity. Her diverse range of female characters defies stereotypes and traditional expectations. They embody strength, resilience, and complexity, challenging the narrow definition imposed by society. Lastly, Jebel's writing gives voices to marginalized women, emphasizing the importance of inclusivity and intersectionality in discussion of gender by providing a platform for their stories to disrupt hierarchical structure and advocate for a more equitable representation of women's experiences. In summary, Assia Jabar's portrayal of women as an active agent of change in her works contribute to a broader conversation about women's experience and the pursuit of gender equality. Through her powerful storytelling, she challenges societal norms, empowers silenced voice, and offers a more nuanced understanding of Arab women identities and agency. Jabar's work stands as a testament to the transformative power of literature in reshaping perception and fostering social change. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mehrnoosh, for keeping to time. That was perfect timing, so we appreciate that. And some really interesting stuff coming out of what you're saying there, which I think will overlap with the rest of the panel. I'm certain of that. But we'll come back to sort of questions at the end, and then we'll pass on to Farzaneh. So if you want to stop sharing your screen, but thank you, Mehrnoosh, again.
Yeah.
And Farzaneh, you said you haven't got a PowerPoint, but you're going to talk through your paper.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so sorry that I don't have a PowerPoint to present here. And if you want, I will start my speech. Right?
Yes, that's perfect. So yeah, if you want to just briefly tell us a little bit about yourself, just very briefly, and then go straight into your paper, please.
Okay, now you hear me?
Yes, I can certainly hear you.
Okay, good evening, everybody. I'm so happy, I'm so honored to be here to participate to this conference. And I hope that you're not so tired to follow my speech, my short interpretation of Assia Jabar's Fantasia, an Algerian cavalcade. My name is Farzaneh Mollazadeh, and I have obtained my bachelor's and master's degree in French literature, French language and literature. And recently, I'm admitted to Tehran University in French studies. It's so recent. And then I'm so interested in feminine topics and the question of femininity in literature, exactly. So I have chosen to speak about Assia Jabar's Fantasia, an Algerian cavalcade, which is entitled in French language, Fantasia, L'amour, la Fantasia. So most of the things that I'm going to talk about are treated in Mehrnoosh's speech because there are lots of common notions and concepts in Assia Jabar's work. She is known to be the Muslim women's voice, and then there are lots of things that coincide in all her works. I start from the introduction of the author, and I will speak about the subject and the notions in L'amour, la Fantasia. L'amour, la Fantasia is perhaps Jabar's most read and widely read novel. And this is a nonlinear novel which interweaves three concepts or three components, which are autobiography of the author herself, the concept of 1830 as recorded in French historical archives, and the War of Liberation of Algeria. But I have entitled my paper Presence of the Powerful Feminine Other Against the Oppressed Silent Feminine Self. Then I should speak about the otherness, or the question, the matter of otherness in literature and in philosophy. What's the otherness? Other is the member of another group, which is so different to your values, your accepted values. This can be different to your according to race, according to language, and other factors. Then the question of other and self was so obvious in her work. Apart from the otherness, the question of otherness, the feminine writing or the feminine vision in writing was obvious to me in her work. But we should pay attention that a woman can write about the women in a male style. What does it mean? This means that we should divide the two concepts. This means the feminine writing and a vision of a female author about a subject. Feminine writing, or en français on dit écriture féminine, refers to a uniquely feminine style of writing characterized by disruptions in the text, such as gaps, silences, new images, and so on. Then writing with a feminine vision or about the women is not necessarily a feminine writing. After this short introduction to the main themes and main subjects, I would enter the major issues, the main issues, which is first of all, discovering the otherness in her work. How can we discover the otherness in Asya Jabar's Fantasia? First of all, the other is a colonizer. According to Asya Jabar, the other is a colonizer. Asya Jabar writing has been located within the traditional post-colonial autobiographical writing and feminine writing by a variety of critics who have written extensively about Maghrebian women. The post-colonial construction of feminine self in autobiographical writing thus features a non-historical, non-linear, non-dialectical, irregular, and ambiguous subjectivity governed by the Lacanian act. After that, other is not inferior to. If you know the concept of otherness in works of Van Dyck, in the works of Jean-Paul Sartre, they consider the other in two ways. They consider the other as a person who is inferior to the self or to me, or a person who annoys the self, annoys me. The phrase, the statement of Jean-Paul Sartre, who says les autres, voilà, autrui, c'est l'enfer, ou other people are annoying us because of their judgment. But in this work, in this novel, according to the concept of otherness, there would be two reactions to other. But in the Fantasia, the other is superior to the self and has the power to change myself or the self of the author. Another criteria or another factor element in the matter of otherness in her work is that other speaks out. Other is not silent. The self is silent, but the other speaks out. As an Arab and Muslim young girl, she has a paradoxical experience. Her equals are not allowed to study, are not allowed to go to school, especially to a colonial school, French school. They are not free. They are not free to speak. They are some cloistered girls in the harem to be or to rest innocent. She has the author as a Muslim girl or as a girl in a Muslim society has the possibility or opportunity to do so. And this is thanks to her father, because her father was a French teacher, a French language teacher at a colonial school. She observes also her mother and other female friends, other we can say neighbors, who can thrive in war scenes, but are not capable or are not allowed to speak in other situations of the daily life. The other female speaks out freely, especially thanks to her language, French language, which is dominating now outer society also. Second part of this paper treats the oppressed self. After representing the question or the matter of otherness, self and other, we should speak about the oppression. There are some factors, some elements which are present and which are present all over Fantasia, Algerian Cavalcade, and in other works of Assia Jebaj. Gender-based discriminations in childhood memories. Because this is an autobiographical work, she recounts and she remembers her memories of childhood and adolescence. Some are so stereotypic, or we can say in French on the cliché, forced or planned marriage, which is one of the most important criteria of the discrimination, gender discrimination. Cloistered girls in harem. She speaks about the girls of her neighbor who are cloistered in their house, but they start to connect with some handsome men. They exchange the letters of love, but they seem cloistered, they seem innocent. Another factor is the intermarriage relationship, where she speaks about a letter which is written by her father to her mother. In that time and in her society, it was forbidden, or it was not accepted that a man and his or a partner have such a intimate relationship, or exchanging love letters, or even interlocate their women. Another element in this part is the feminine cries in war. We have spoken about the silence of the women. They don't speak with their husbands. They don't have the opportunity to express themselves. But in war scenes, they cry. They they sing some folkloric songs to show their fatigue, to show their depression, and this is where we can hear women or female voices. The feminine voice, which is absent all over the novel to express herself, rises just in war, oppressing acts like the infumigation of Algerians in the case of Alcantara. The story is framed by the grieving cries of the neighboring women. I should read a part of the novel. At noon, the beating continued. I attended to the meal while listening to the tornado and its modulation. I was growing used to them. Jabbar's insistence on drawing the narrator's and the reader's attention back to the grieving women gives prominence to the women's experiences of war. Here, she is the voice of voiceless women, which are oppressed not only by their society, but also in war scenes and by the others. In the third and last part of the paper, I pay attention to language dilemma for the author. Writing in the language of other. I have entitled, in fact, it's a subtitle, right? Writing in the language of other, because for Assia Jabbar, French language remains the language of the other, not her mother tongue, and sometimes she speaks about the Arab language or Berber language with the title or with the name of father tongue, because this was her father's. This was her father who let her go to school, but he spoke French language. And in this part, it's been always a difficult procedure to use the other language to write. It has never been the same as her mother tongue. Jabbar decided to write in French language to take a barrier, to take a distance from the reader or from what really happened in her life. She tells that excuse me. She tells that deciding to write in French let me take this distance. The languages are a matter of racialism also in Jabbar's mentality. I will read a part of her work. Les morts algériens ne sont que les fantômes, privés d'identité. Ils ne sont rien au regard des officiers français. Le plus terrible semble être plus que la mort elle-même, l'absence de littérature qui puisse consigner les morts. Le roman expose la réflexion de l'auteur sur l'aphasie, côté assiégé. Or, l'ennemi revient sur l'arrière, sa guerre à lui apparaît muette. Sans écriture, sans temps de l'écrire. Écrire sur la guerre d'Afrique et se prétendre repeupler au théâtre déserté.
Sorry, Farzaneh, we've got about 4 minutes.
Yes, I will finish my speech. In this part, she speaks about the language which doesn't exist to describe the Algerian soldiers who are died in the war of Algeria. So coming to conclusion, the innovation of my interpretation is that in the terms of discourse, the other is always humiliated and weakened, or according to Sartre, the other is annoying because he judges me or myself. But in this work by Assia Jabbar, the type of interaction or confrontation between self and the other is complex. This means the other has conquered the collective self of the author. This means all the equal female of Assia Jabbar, and also the men of her society. The other has conquered the collective self of author by his power, so this other is not weak. Moreover, the other is not limited to his judging gaze. Rather, the other is the agent position, both in terms of military or hard power and in terms of cultural power. In this situation, language can free her from the barriers of a patriarchal and discriminatory society, by which she becomes even the voice of her voiceless collective feminine self. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Farzaneh. That was again really interesting, and lots of crossover from the first paper, and hopefully there will be bits that will continue into my paper. So just bear with me whilst I get my paper. Thank you for that, Farzaneh. So my name's Oliver Brett. I'll just share my screen. So I'm assuming that you can see my PowerPoint okay. So my name's Oliver Brett. I am currently an assistant professor at the University of Nottingham in the School of Health Sciences. My background in terms of my postgraduate training, my undergraduate and postgraduate training, alongside lots of other things that I've done, were in French and Italian studies. Currently, I'm very interested in the comparative side of things, and I've recently done some work on pandemic documentary. So it's quarter to, so I'll hopefully stick to the time. So translating the body, La Petite Dernière, Fatima Das. So let's just move this along. Oh, there we go. So in this paper, I focus on Fatima Das's award-winning debut novel, La Petite Dernière, the last one in English, which was published in France in 2020, immediately following the completion of Das's master's in creative writing at Paris 8. The novel initially forming part of her coursework. The work offers something very timely to a consideration of women, Islam, and agency in Francophone autobiography. I start with an overview of the novel, which is important for those unfamiliar with Das. This initial overview will briefly locate the work in relation to the context of France. In building on this, i.e. in terms of how we might think about the novel in terms of translating the body, I introduced the notion of cramped space by Deleuze and Guattari. This notion could be a way of approaching the representation of intersectionality that permeates the whole work, a position that is not without its difficulties. La Petite Dernière is frequently described as autofiction, and although Das is not completely against her novel being described as such, for she does mix fact and fiction in its construction, she is equally happy for it to be described as an interior monologue or a long poem in prose. Other associations have been made to it having a cinema verite style, a point to which I'll return later. While one reviewer felt it was like progressively getting to know someone through a social media platform, combined snippets of someone's life somehow coming together, but with a certain distance still remaining. Das is also fond of rap, and this can be seen in short pulsating sentences which give certain sections a rhythm and pace that deconstruct classist assumptions of what it means to refer to good quality literature. This also adds to identifiable parallels between the corporeal and the textual. The narrator bears the same name as the author, although this is a pseudonym used by Das, the author, in allowing her both to shield her family from her queer project and to feel free in exploring her identity in its multiple forms. The character refers to herself as either Fatima or Fatima Das at the beginning of 70 of the 71 vignettes. Vignettes rather than chapters, I would say, given their overall limited length and evocative descriptions. So what does Das intend by the title, La Petite Dernière, the last one in English? Das is essentially drawing attention to the position of the narrator within the household. She is the Matzouzia, which is Algerian Arabic. Je m'appelle Fatima Das, je suis la Matzouzia, la petite dernière, celle à laquelle on ne s'est pas préparé, the one they weren't prepared for. Fatima was the only one of the siblings born in France. Her two older sisters, Hanan and Dunia, having been born in Algeria. She's 29 years old, soon to turn 30, she tells us, and she sees herself as French, Algerian, lesbian, and Muslim. Her thoughts and memories oscillate between the periphery and the center in her exploration of language, religion, culture, sexuality, and gender. There is no clear linearity as she navigates the various aspects of her identity as she moves between the banlieue of Clichy-sous-Bois and Paris, where she studies literature, and then between France and Algeria. She recounts a range of different experiences, too many to mention here, that articulate the various layers of a complex identity, one which cannot be clearly fixed. The narrator also describes herself as inadaptée, a misfit, while also acknowledging the influence of dissimulation, which was taught to her by her immigrant parents. That is the concealment of her difference. As this contrast demonstrates, Fatima frequently references the spatial shifts she experiences between the individual and the collective. She observes others on her journeys across Paris, at one point describing herself as a tourist, and links the action of writing to a physical flow, one that goes in different directions and which may have a potentially negative impact on her body if she fails to reach the end of the line, and or if she needs to face the wrong way around on that journey. Countering the generational dissimulation or concealment of identity through the act of writing is a challenge, it would seem. Overall, the book was a huge success in France and has since been translated into other languages, including English, and is also now being made into a film. It is no surprise, however, that the complexity of Das's identity, but perhaps more importantly, the openness with which it would be discussed within the media in France upon its release, resulted in some responses being described by Stroyer as violent et virulent, violent and virulent. The novel was included in Jean-Marc Proust's scathing review of successfully commercial Livres à ne pas offrir à Noël, books not to offer at Christmas. There was also an aggressive response from within the queer community on one occasion. In agreeing during a radio interview that being a lesbian, like her protagonist narrator, meant that she too had explored what it was to be a sinner within Islam, Das states that she was seeking to draw out the intricacies of her experiences rather than to renounce a key part of her identity of which she has no shame, although the LGBT community fervently accused her of homophobia on social media soon after the broadcast. While impossible to live out a lesbian identity in the large Muslim community of Clichy-sous-Bois, it was deemed equally inconceivable in urban queer Parisian enclaves that she would want to identify both as a Muslim and a lesbian. Of her violent treatment by the media, Das explains how, in contrast, there was a general ambivalent response from within the Muslim community of Clichy-sous-Bois regarding her novel and its content. Despite the polarizing nature of identity, as highlighted here, what is in fact notable about the work is just how ordinary and prosaic the narrator's life is. I agree with Meili when she says that La Petite Dernière wrings complexity from the mundane, which undoubtedly allows people to connect with her in various ways, which is possibly why it's been so successful. Egan reminds us that the writing of those from the Maghreb is often interpreted in France as a direct representation of a specific experience rather than as potentially indicative of a particular critical position. This has the potential to lead to essentialized narratives being outlined rather than to a consideration of the technical and agentive features of such work. As already noted, Das is seen from within a French universal perspective as potentially wanting to be divisive with the labels French, Algerian, lesbian, and Muslim. While the author's reflexive position on writing is not a particularly innovative critical position, her engagement with representation as action seems to want to counter the fixing of narratives surrounding what it means to be a Muslim in France. One description in the Times Literary Supplement refers to the novel as having the urgency of a well-made cinéma vérité. With this in mind, the reflexive slant of the novel has the potential to be framed in intermedial terms too. That is, of course, if thinking about cinéma vérité as an agile and improvised mode of representing hidden realities through outside intervention. Das's idea of the writing process as allowing her narrator to breathe also emphasizes the physical drive of this novel. She states, writing promises a form of legitimacy. It's a tool for self-knowledge. It's not a coincidence that the character suffers from asthma. She's not interested in elitist interpretations of literature. For her, finding writing is much like finding a way to breathe. And here are a couple of examples of Fatima's relationship to writing that highlight her conscious criticality, something that emerges in the book. And I'll just let you read those. Thinking through the complexity of Das's identity in inverted commas, and notably its wider reception in France, which is very revealing, particularly in its potential divisiveness, I want to make a little more sense of how Das, the author, seeks to translate the body in La Petite Dernière. The author describes herself as a féministe intersectionnelle, intersectional feminist, which, in foregrounding the subjective experience of different aspects of identity, problematizes the positioning of this work in relation to the universal rights of women and to any notion of identity politics in the context of Republican France. In the book, it has been noted that the narrator, while sharing many features with the author, adopts on one occasion a negative and stereotypical view of feminism, and that this reflects an acute awareness on the part of Das, the author, of the variability with which feminism must be considered. In grappling with the intricacies of how intersectionality is thus represented in and through La Petite Dernière, Deleuze and Guattari's theorizations of cramped space are useful. Hopefully you can see that. Cramped space forces its subjects to be creative and experimental, to pursue politics at the limit, and fashion lives with whatever material, languages, and identities they find close at hand. No ready-made trajectories are available under cramped conditions, and non-linear mobility is part of the experience. Actions in this context are not linear and clearly determinable, but rather saturated by fleeting imponderableness and moments of uncertainty, which I think goes back to the prosaic nature of the work largely. As highlighted so far in this paper, many of these features are reflected in the navigations of Das's narrator. As Thoburn points out, the theory of cramped space contends that politics arises among those who lack and refuse coherent identity in their negotiation of the individual and the collective. So cramped space does not mean isolated, as identity cannot not be social. Egan draws attention to the difference between the author and narrator regarding intersectionality, as discussed here, respectively between contemporary feminist young millennial women in France today and intersecting positions of historical oppression. She highlights, however, that unexpected solidarities can be forged between the two and how notions of inclusivity and exclusivity of feminism as a predominantly white middle-class position are undone in La Petite Dernière. Rather than being a reiteration of the informed and the uninformed, Egan emphasizes how Das's intersectionality works beyond the dichotomous in recognizing experiences and agency of Muslim women. I will now explore how this is expressed in a very particular way in La Petite Dernière. In contrast to the variegated nature of the narrator's existence, her mother appears to remain a centralizing force throughout La Petite Dernière. In thinking about how we could translate Das's representation of the body, her own and potentially that of other Muslim women, such as her mother, I draw attention to the difference between plotting and narrating. La Petite Dernière is very much the non-linear plotting of different cultural experiences that can be filtered in any number of ways through the book's openness and sustained circularity. The book starts and ends with the narrator's mother, Kamar Das, positioned firmly in the kitchen, her ordered royaume, kingdom, contrasting well with the disorder of Fatima's thoughts and reflections throughout La Petite Dernière. The activities of the kitchen, that is the providing of food by the mother, remain stable between these two key points of the book. Although there is a shift in the nature of the encounter between mother and daughter that is worth highlighting more clearly in connecting different ideas of feminism and solidarity as a kind of body. We learn in the very early stage of the book, Vignette 3, that Kamar, at the age of 30, had Fatima by caesarean section, and that this was followed by a heart attack. Fatima bears guilt for this as she grows up and states, "Je m'en veux d'être née, I blame myself for being born." We learn in the final vignette that Fatima, upon visiting her mother on her 29th birthday, continues to think about having been an accidental pregnancy, unwanted, and to have been somehow responsible for the negative outcome of the caesarean section. It is also during this encounter that Fatima mentions to her mother how she wants to write her novel, something which Kamar, her mother, is very much interested in hearing about, but which Fatima feels initially needs to wait until another time, as she assumes that her mother is really not interested at that moment. The freshly baked birthday madeleines of the encounter point to memory, thinking of Proust. But this is countered through the consistent use of the first person present tense in this vignette, which is distinct from previous sections, thereby giving it more immediacy. We also learn from the encounter that Kamar had always wanted to train to be a nurse, but that her brother had forbidden her from doing this. The girls, her children, could now appease this en faisant de grandes choses, by doing great things. There is also the gifting from her mother, Fatima's queen, of the notebook, which is ceremonially removed from the cupboard and handed to Fatima with the words in English, "Present for you," written on it, on the front of the book, the notebook. She also says, "Happy birthday, Benti, my daughter," as she hands her this gift. This is a significant gesture on her mother's part, particularly as Fatima was expecting more food to emerge. The outcome of this emotional encounter is possibly the book we have been reading, as earlier references to writing by Fatima mention the use of a notebook and note-taking. The movement evoked through the circularity of the book-ended kingdom can be seen as framing the contents while connecting histories of oppression and dissimulation, particularly in the case of her mother, and the more contemporary writer's intersectional perspective. While the final vignette occurs on the narrator's 29th birthday, temporal pointers suggest that beyond this scene, i.e. beyond the end of the book and outside the book itself, the narrator is now probably aged 30, the age at which Kamar gave birth to Fatima through a caesarean section. There seems to be something significant there. I don't know what it is, but it's interesting. They are both connected by the trauma outlined in the earlier vignettes. That is the coring out of La Petite Dernière, the last one, and the cutting and editing of the woman to the frame of motherhood and domesticity and dissimulation. This is replaced by the opening up of a different space, the cupboard, from which the writing tool emerges. The cutting and the editing can now be different, but one which is agentic and one which connects the complexity of the stories involved between these two women. In conclusion, the translation of the body in and through La Petite Dernière draws parallels between the corporeal and the textual, between physical action and the intermedial, and between separation and solidarity and the individual and the collective. I could not say with any certainty that the debut work of Das is groundbreaking in terms of content and issues raised. What appears to be more important, though, is the change in dialogue that it has brought about in giving voice more publicly to Muslim women in its broad sense. And that is the end of my paper. The only additional thing I will say about La Petite Dernière is that it's a really accessible book, and the language is it's often hard to be able to write very concise language, but obviously rap is something that's influenced how she writes. But I think what adds to the access to this book in terms of its novelty is that it is so accessible, and the universal comes out of people outside of Islam being interested in. There's material in it that is extremely funny, very everyday, and allows lots of people beyond Islam to connect with somebody that they can relate to. So from a personal perspective, I really enjoyed reading this book. I thought it was so enlightening and opening and interesting and offered a very different perspective. So thank you for listening to me, everybody. And that's all the paper's done for today. So we'll stop the share, and then Maria, do you want to kind of manage the questions?
Okay, thank you everyone for your papers, very interesting papers, everyone. Is there any question from the audience? Should I break the ice then? I have a question for Mehrnoosh, but that could be for Farzaneh as well, as we're discussing the same author. Jadwa, she's known for blending history and fiction.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, could you provide some examples of how she can achieve that?
Yeah, of course. For example, in her novel Woman Without a Grave, she blends history and fiction, and she fills the gap of official record, historical records, with multiple narratives of women of lower socioeconomic backgrounds and rural communities. And with this technique, she gives the opportunity to these women to have voice. And in Les Femmes d'Alger dans leur appartement, Women of Alger in their apartments, she blended the fiction, history, and memoir somehow with historical elements. For example, about the fact of the historical period, she's the professor of history, and she intertwined different forms and genres, and like I said, it's like a hybridity and blending and intertwining the different forms and genres in her writing style.
Thank you. I don't know if Farzaneh would like to add anything at all.
Yeah. If I want to add something to Mehrnoosh,
and then there's a question. Yeah, I can see that. We will take the question.
Can I ask a question?
Has finished answering the question. Please.
You'd like to ask a question?
Yes.
Or I
want to pick up on something that Brett said. which is how important do you think this writing is to make people that have no connection, no biographical connection to Islam, to become closer to a perspective of...
Joanna, sorry if I interrupt you, just checking, because I'm struggling to hear you. Just checking that everyone can hear from the audience. Can you hear okay?
Yes, I can hear fine. Everyone else?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I think what these women writers are doing is very important because they are creating, they are translating, I think, an in-between position to people that are just interested in literature and like to know more about Islam and how it feels to live in the West, belonging to the, not belonging because they belong to the West, but probably integrating a perspective that also comes from somewhere else. I think what I'm reaching at is there's a diaspora element in this writing, a sort of migrant experience, and then this diaspora and migrant experience overlaps with, I think, the effort to explain Islam to people outside of this world. And in that sense, I think what these women are doing is very important. It goes beyond feminist assertion, and it goes beyond finding a voice. It's really an intervention. You know, I would like you to comment on this. It was for all presenters. It was for all of you.
Oh.
If you let, I will speak about this point. Thank you for the question. It was so interesting. Assia Debar has a role of historian. She's not a real, you can say, feminist activist, but according to the history, according to her work, she has the role of historian, she has the role of author and novelist, and beyond this, or over her work, she is trying to impact her society or to make a voice which is heard by her society and by others. Yeah, I accept that she has a role of in between. She's not 100% activist. She's not 100% novelist, but she does the two roles together.
Yes, so Joanna, I think just thinking about the work of Fatima Das, which is her debut novel, it's her only novel, and I think it kind of links to this idea of action and sort of doing something. So her work started off as she had to fulfill an assessment criteria, I suppose, for her master's. But within the actual, and then she was encouraged to publish it very soon afterwards. But what comes through in her work is this idea of action, intervention. And what is interesting is how lots of other people interpret her one work in different ways. So it feels poetic, it feels like a prayer, it feels like cinematic, it feels like script writing. So I think that points to it being something other than I don't know. It suggests something else, which comes back to action, intervention, and influencing the dialogue, and these interventions allowing her and us to kind of move in and out of this sort of individual perspective, collective perspective, and maybe what that does to our identity. So that's what I would say. I think is key to Fatima Das's work.
I'd like to get one more question, if there's any from the audience. I think, am I right in thinking there was a hand raised before? Is there any more questions? Oliver's got a question. You okay?
Farzaneh, I'm not familiar with Jabbar, but you mentioned about the other, and the other is it's this humiliated position. And I'm just wondering whether you could just elaborate a little bit more on that, and whether you could see the other in an ethical way rather than specifically. So it's the humiliated bit I was just trying to work out.
When I speak about the humiliation of the other, I mean that I have read the works of Theo van Dijk, who is a scholar from the Netherlands. He has portrayed a rectangle where he speaks about the humiliation of the other and the preference of our or us, and this has shaped the rectangle. But in the work of Assia Jabbar, the other is not humiliated. The other is superior to myself or to the author's self. And because he has the power, he has a powerful culture, and he has conquered her country. And the most important is that the language of other is now used at the school, at the university, and all over in her society. She looks her, she watches the scene, and she feels that the other is superior to me, not inferior to me.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. No, that kind of, and that's kind of making me think about how that then links to your, I don't know, sort of a relationship of ethics, and I don't know, something along those lines. And I think also what you said about the folkloric cries was really interesting, and how that can be I don't know, some sort of like corporeal, sort of bodily connection that works beyond the words on the page.
In some parts, when she speaks about the history of the Algerian war, she speaks about or she portrays the scenes where female neighbors or the females who are in the caves of Alcantara are crying with these folkloric songs. And there, this is the form of speech for the female self or collective self. But in other situations, for expressing herself, there is no idea, there is no trace, we can say, in her work. Then we can say that the female self is silent. I don't know.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
نعم این چیز رفت روی
Is that somebody? Sorry, did somebody ask a question? Sorry. It might have been feedback, maybe, between me and Maria. Sorry about that. So in terms of, unless there's any other questions, but certainly if anybody's got any questions relating to early content, we can certainly discuss that. If anybody wants to add their insight and feedback to the day, we would really appreciate that. We've got a few minutes left.
May I add little something, please?
Oh, please, yes.
What I wanted to say is sometimes each community brings the cultural Islam into it. that's not the Islam, the one that is of the Quran. And because each one of us in our communities, we have some habits and some traditions that we mix with and becomes Islamic culture. So sometimes people judge and they think that is the real Islam, while it is not, because it's a distorted Islam. This is just what I wanted to add to as a,
Sure, yeah. Thank you for that. And in terms of, could you elaborate in terms of any connections with the papers this afternoon? Just out of interest and connect to, is that something that you can do? Kind of.
Okay, like let's say cultural Islam can be, for example, a forced marriage, or if the father deciding that the daughter has to marry a certain person that the family decides. But in Somali culture, we have that also. But also, sometimes male are forced to marry. And it's not only because she's a female, but it is also, but that is it's the culture that is mixing with Islam in a way, because they connect it with if you marry this person and you are the eldest son, let's say, you are blessed. Otherwise, your father and the family will curse you. So this is not Islam in a way, because Islam says that when two people get married, first of all, you have even to ask the girl if she's if she wants to get married with that person. So you have to ask permission to her. But sometimes it's like cultural marriage and cultural Islam that yes, that mixes with the Islam. And people from outside, they think that all Muslims are like this, while Muslim is a very spread religion that touches many countries, many people, many traditions. So each one of us, we sometimes mix our tradition with the Islamic, and people from outside, they think that is Islam.
And that could vary between families within a particular location.
Yes, region, location, traditions that they already had, and they mix it with the and
that's really interesting. Thank you for that, Shirin, because it helps us kind of appreciate the text and what people
I think
are saying.
Joanna was saying that people who doesn't know much about Islam, I think one has to hear a lot of voices.
Sure.
Coming from different people, different writers, and not only tabloids. And then research on Islam, what Islam says, and then we can have our own opinion.
And that's why I think with Fatima Das particularly, her treatment within the media was based on key labels and not actually the content of her book, which is possibly very different to a family that could be living next door to her. But yes, that kind of external treatment, very different to what occurs within.
For example, very sensitive is like when you talk about gay and lesbians in Islam. It's very wrong to say that person is not a Muslim, because we are not. We don't have to judge. We cannot judge. I mean, Islam, it doesn't mean that a woman is Muslim because she's wearing the hijab or the man has a beard. Islam it's much more profound, much more spiritual than just judging a person from their looks or how they behave, how they are dressed.
And I think that's where I think with Fatima particularly, I'm talking about Fatima, but she and the mixing of the author with the protagonist is one of wanting to in terms of her concept of the universal is actually a very different one to the one that's being sort of generated within French media. So thank you very much for that. I think there's a comment by Audrey. Audrey, did you want to come in there? Audrey West. Sorry, I don't know whether she's left actually. Did you see the comment in? Oh.
I spoke earlier, and I.
Yes. So Audrey.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, because I had a bit of a rant earlier. And
no, I'd love to hear more about what you've got to say.
I think the second part actually helped to calm me in the sense of the journey and the way the voices actually are so powerful that they are describing the complexity of our journeys. And your interpretations of those also, all of you, gave me more of a grounding in, do you know what I mean? It is the power of literature to describe the human journey that I'm looking at. And
absolutely. And you mentioned earlier about the humanity being the absolute key thing. Could you say a couple of sentences on that for us? Because I think it would really, really help us, to be honest. Just your thoughts.
Yes, because I think we move away often from seeing our similarities as human beings and animals and all the rest of it. I kind of feel that we've gone so colonial in everything's sort of chopped up. And I mean colonial because that's often where the journey started, when we're power building and separating and creating structures that mean that one group is inferior to the other. And we're given sort of power from on high to make that happen. And actually, I feel we need to move bottom up now and really look at all of us in terms of animals, people, the globe as a unit. Otherwise, we'll keep being fractured. So that's where the humanity comes in, where we actually recognize that we're all unique and yet similar. It's that sort of...
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. And
so that's just that bit of complexity that I'm talking about, really. And it was good for me to see the complexities of the Islamic woman, because I don't know a lot of those.
Sure. And I think, given the way in which the world always presents lots of challenges, increasingly, I think we've got to come back to this kind of, like you say, the human, the essentials, the basics, I suppose, of it all. So I really appreciate your contribution there, Audrey, as I'm sure the rest of the audience do. Anybody got any comments in response to that, or any thoughts about that? I think it would be really, really good.
Thank you for your organizing this conference. I wanted to say thank you.
Oh, thank you for contributing and partaking, and hopefully this will lead on to other ideas and thoughts and potential collaborations. I mean, that's kind of the purpose of these kind of events, and I think on a personal level, I think it's been quite good to keep as a sort of a mini conference, so we don't get completely fatigued by the electronic, I don't know what you call it, digital, so we're probably all pretty exhausted anyway. So any longer than half a day would have probably been a bit too much. But I've certainly really enjoyed it and learnt loads from it. Maria, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I would just want to say a big thank you to everyone for being here today. Thank you to the Center for the Study of Contemporary Women's Writing for making this possible. Thank you, Jenny, for your top assistance today. Thank you, Oliver, for organizing this with me. Thank you, Shirin and Simone. I know that Simone has left already. Thank you for your conversation. That was really inspiring. Thank you to our presenters for raising such important topics. And I also have learned a lot from them. And I also hope, as Oliver said, that this will lead to more conversations and future collaborations. So a big thank you, everyone, on my end. And if there's anything that Godela might want to say, some closing words.
Just a big thank you to you for putting this program together. And like you, I also want to say I've learned a lot of food for thought. Brilliant. Thank you very much.